Hi, and welcome back to the History Machine podcast. This is episode 21, the final in a 3-part series of episodes on Pompey the Great, and this one is titled Pompey and Caesar. We have covered a lot of the life of Caesar on the episode of Caesar, and we've touched a little bit on Pompey in the process. However, this entire episode is going to be trying to focus on what's going on in Pompey's camp and with Pompey while Caesar is doing things. We need to kind of focus on Caesar's going to be in Gaul, but Pompey's over here doing the whole political thing. Or Caesar's crossing the Alps, but Pompey's trying to raise some legions. Or Caesar is doing A and Pompey is doing B. On the episode of Caesar, we didn't really focus at all on what Pompey and his allies are up to. And that is going to be the major difference from this episode to the existing Caesar episode. If Pompey is blind on knowledge, we're going to tell you he's blind on knowledge. If Pompey reacts too quickly or doesn't do something, we're going to tell you if he does that. But that is the key difference between this episode and the earlier episode. So when we last left off, Pompey had just celebrated his 3rd triumph and his 45th birthday. So he'd had a pretty good time. He had raised the annual tribune from 20 million sesterces to 340 million sesterces per annum. When we left off the last episode, we still had 40,000 veterans who had not received their land allotments, and this is quite a dangerous and serious situation to be left politically for Pompey. So from here, we're going to enter a one Julius Caesar. Caesar has popped up earlier in our Pompey episodes. Of course, we had an episode on Caesar himself. But to begin, Caesar had recently returned from Spain. And Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey form a very unlikely alliance known to history as the Triumvirate. Now, part of this deal, and this is a very strange deal, and the reason this is a strange deal is Crassus and Pompey historically are not really friends. They actually kind of go at each other's throats at times, so the idea that the two of them might decide to set aside their differences just so they can achieve their political aims doesn't seem very in character for the two. And then Julius Caesar seems to be the kind of upstart who's joined the group to kind of go, listen, I'll provide the various support, we'll have this secret shady deal, and then if anything we want to get done for the three of us, we can get it done. Caesar's part of this deal is to have Caesar elected as consul. And once his year is over, he's going to get a military command in one of the provinces. Now, Pompey is a bit cautious. He's very aware that he's building a potentially powerful political rival, but he could not have foreseen how unbelievably successful this rival would be that he's about to build. So why did Pompey agree to the triumvirate? Simply, he did this just to get his 2 political plans passed successfully. Number 1, he needed the land for his veterans, and number 2, he needed the ratification of the Eastern conquests. So Pompey just wants these things passed. That's all he wants, and then he can walk around as the main man in Rome or as the leading guy, just kind of swaggering about now that he's got his job done. So by 60 BC, Pompey had learned the lessons of threatening to use political force for political gains. Caesar and Pompey are going to use soldiers to forcefully remove opposing speakers such as Bibulus, who it is said that when he was removed as a speaker had a mob pour a bucket of shit over his head. So, that's a pretty bad day for Bibulus. And the bills are passed. This is where we're going to have a rough-handed approach being implemented. What Caesar brings to the table, and this is where some critics of Caesar get their kind of thing of like, he's not always a brilliant orator, he's not always this fantastic politician. Sometimes he just brings political force into the world of politics. And because he introduces that, and because he uses political force to achieve the aims, he creates a chaotic state. So Caesar isn't just this brilliant tactician, and he's not yet this brilliant politician. But what he is offering to Pompey and to Crassus is, I will get physical force to happen that you won't be directly tied to in order to get political aims achieved.
And we did see Pompey's main weakness over the last couple of episodes just being, he didn't know how to handle the political sphere.
He couldn't quite do it. But then again, most of his political opponents, they all really joined together to make sure nothing would happen. But I suppose if a bucket of feces is going to be poured over your head, you're probably going to change your mind. So, literally slinging.
But slinging in its purest form.
Yes, definitely. Pompey has learned the lessons of using physical force for political gains. This is funny because Pompey will feign ignorance to all these underhanded tactics. So he'll be like, oh, I'm aghast to find out that such horrible things have been done. And conveniently it's for my benefit. But still I'm shocked and appalled, and I would never have a terrible thing happen. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Could you imagine it happening to someone else who happened to oppose me? Just imagine that happening.
So anyway, Caesar continues to bully the opposition. That's what he does. So this is where he kind of gets the reputation as just a political thug. In April of 60 BC, Caesar offered his daughter Julia as a wife to Pompey. A couple of things to note here. Julia is 30 years younger than Pompey. However, this is really important, Julia was witty, she was talented, and she seemed to love Pompey. Now, it's also possible that Pompey actually reached out to Caesar for the marriage and not the other way around. Now, this is because, by all accounts, Pompey was very much in love and smitten with his wife. So, as part of the deal of the triumvirate, Caesar gets a proconsulship in Gaul. From 59 to 57 BC, Pompey retired from politics. He spends his time with his wife, he enjoys the arts, he's living in the countryside. He forms a literary circle where several histories of him are written by colleagues. Now, unfortunately, none of these survive. So yes, it is right to say Pompey forms a book club.
The book club where everyone just gets to write biographies of him.
So now we'll review your book on me and see how this goes. So unfortunately, none of those survive, which is a bit of a killer. It'd be very handy for this episode. Like that, there's nice little bits of information and they just don't make it through the passage of time. The building of his theatre continues. Now later, Pompey was made commissioner of the corn or the grain distribution. You know, people say corn or grain, kind of interchangeable, even though there is no corn in ancient Rome, but, it's often referred to as the corn dole. So he is given a very important logistical role. And if there's one thing Pompey can do well, it's logistics. So he is made the commissioner of the grain distribution. By 57 BC, Pompey returns to Rome. At this point, there is a conference of Luca between the members of the triumvirate, and it's decided upon a few things in this conference. We didn't really kind of go into this too much at the very start, but the triumvirate is very much a secret, backroom, shady deal. It's very against the apparent character of Pompey. So it's unusual that you'd have these kind of actions, but it would probably attest to the idea that, behind the scenes, he's a much more politically shrewd individual. Even though publicly, politically, he's not really able to get a lot done. But from this conference, three things will happen. Pompey will become the consul, Crassus will get to go to Parthia, he's looking for some conquests, and Caesar will continue his role in Gaul. So in April, under orders from Pompey, the king of Syria is to put Ptolemy XII back on the throne of Egypt. Now once again, we're going to see the near emperor status of Pompey when he's in the east, and his abilities that he possesses there. He's able to simply send some messages and this is going to happen. But the two areas where he has virtually no sway in comparison is one, the Senate, and two, Julius Caesar. He's just not really able to get him to do exactly what he wants him to do. In 54 BC, Pompey's wife and Caesar's daughter, Julia, dies in childbirth. Shortly afterward, the daughter that she gives birth to also passes away. Pompey is devastated by this. Now, historical focus tends to lean on their crumbling relationship between him and Caesar, but ultimately this is a very, very difficult period for the two of them. Caesar's after losing a daughter, and Pompey's after losing what seems to be the love of his life and a child. Anyway, that's a very sad note, but even with that aside, I think it's important just to mention it. But Roman politics, thanks to Caesar and Pompey, is now at this time completely rife with violence, bribery, and corruption. Two figures in particular, Clodius and Milo, are both chief culprits because they're using gangs to cause havoc. Now, Pompey is secretly in support of these actions, as we've mentioned. It is to his benefit, and during this chaotic violence, that for the first time ever, the beginning of 53 BC, there were no consuls elected. This is just the chaos that's actually happening. It's an unprecedented moment for the Roman Republic. By midsummer of 53 BC, in order to sort out politics, Pompey is offered a dictatorship, but he refuses it. He does, though, manage to organise and follow up with a consular election, and however he manages to do that, but he makes a Domitus Calvinius and a Valerius consuls. Now, we've no idea how he manages this feat, because the situation is so unbelievably unstable, but somehow he manages to do it. Now, not all of the blame should be pinned on the triumvirate. The Senate should really take their share of responsibility for letting the politics of Rome devolve to this extent. Having new consuls doesn't fix any of these issues, and in June, Crassus is defeated and killed in Carrhae. Now, we've talked about this in the episode on Julius Caesar. It is a case of horse archers and a lot of bad news for Crassus. But because he's dead, the triumvirate effectively is now just reduced to 2 individuals. Pompey marries again, but this time he's going to marry Cornelia. Now, Cornelia is the widow of Publius Crassus, which is Crassus' son. So it's like, I'm sorry, your husband and father-in-law died in Parthia, but I am now your new husband. This is how it works.
If you made a film adaptation of this, people would complain that like you weren't willing to pay enough actors and you kept having people double up in roles. Like it's ridiculous just how.
Yeah. But by all accounts, Cornelia is intelligent. She's interesting. She's very blue-blooded. It should be noted as well that Pompey turned down a marriage offer from Caesar to marry his grandniece Octavia, who is the sister of Octavian, the future emperor of Rome. So he kind of turns that offer down from Caesar and instead finds another wife, Cornelia. In the opening of 52 BC, the situation is almost identical to 53 BC. For a second time, no new consuls are elected. Pompey probably added to this chaos by preventing candidates he didn't like being elected, and Milo's up to his old tricks here again. Milo, who'd caused so many political instabilities, took one step too far, and he has his rival Clodius killed. After this, Pompey was once again offered the role of dictator, and he simply refused it. Now, we've seen this pop up a few times, where when Pompey is offered all absolute and complete power, he just turns it down. He doesn't seem to want to pull the whole Sulla thing. It just doesn't seem to be the thing. Within 2 years, he's been offered to be dictator twice, and both times he's turned it down. So it's a mad situation, and it's a situation that is partially created by Pompey's actions. So it's really, really messy, but he continues to be doing that. Now, Milo attempts to meet with Pompey to rectify the situation, but Pompey refuses to meet him. The following day, Pompeius Rufus, who's a relation of Pompey, he hints to Pompey that Milo might be planning an assassination of Pompey. Now, Pompey was notoriously fearful of assassinations, so he took precautions to safeguard himself and his people in his living quarters. Cato and the ex-consul Biblius, the one who has had a bucket poured over him, proposed that Pompey should be elected as the sole consul of Rome. Now, this way, they can get around the taboo of dictator. Pompey accepts this compromise. Now, it should be noted, this is grossly unconstitutional for the Romans. It defeats the whole purpose of having a two-man office. It has no precedent. It ignores most of the checks and balances of the Republic. For example, Pompey had been consul back in 55 BC. The office of consul should have been barred from him for a further 10 years, but he's always the exception to the rule. Also, he was currently elected as a proconsul. As he's elected as sole consul, he gets to keep the powers of being a proconsul and the sole consul, and it just gets really messy. So he is dictator in all but name. It's ridiculous.
It's very, Democratic People's Republic of North Korea here, just...
Yeah, it's really messy. Now, there's also no evidence to suggest that this new sole consul position had any kind of an election. It might have just been a title that was given. But with his shiny new title, these are things that Pompey seems to love, unless that title is dictator, it's expected that Pompey would deal with Milo and his street gangs. Pompey is going to do this, and he's going to do it with the Senate in a number of ways. So Pompey and the Senate are going to draft new laws. The first law is they're going to set up a court of inquiry. The second law is, using this newly founded court, they're going to prosecute any magistrate from the year 70 BC onwards who is found guilty of bribery. The third law they're going to try and pass is they're going to grant immunity for petty crimes, provided the person who committed those crimes could provide evidence for the prosecution of a major crime. And the fourth and last law that they're going to try and implement is harsher punishments than historic precedences for these new convictions. The biggest opposition to these would be from Milo and his allies and the street gangs. Now, they argue a couple of things. They argue the existing laws are sufficient, and that there is a state of emergency, and the situation should not be used to push through these new drastic laws. Now, contrary to his methods and ways, and a little bit unusual, he's a little bit more shrewd here, but Pompey's group managed to get Milo's points separated into smaller individual points, so they can veto the parts they don't want, but then they can vote on the parts that they do. So, for example, they agree there is a state of emergency, but they disagree that the existing laws are sufficient. Now, this is a sign of the frustration of the times and the radical desperation by Pompey and the Senate to implement these changes, but they're going to do it. The new laws of Pompey are passed. Milo is prosecuted by a jury of No, you want to say a fair jury. This is not a fair jury. Milo is prosecuted by a jury hand-selected by Pompey and sentenced to exile in a majority vote of 38 to 13. So that adds up, just for your own sake, to 51. So the Roman juries did like prime numbers. We're seeing them in action. Good job.
Just the levels of political technicality, loopholing, it feels so modern, but it turns out we've been doing this for thousands of years.
Well, most legal systems are based on this or follow from it. So yeah, there we go.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, what I find funny is the vote is only 38 to 13. It's like, you hand-selected these people. Who? Did someone misspell their name again? What happened? But, 51, fun number to use because a prime number, so it makes it that, we can't have a draw. So during all of this, Caesar is in Gaul fighting the Gallic peoples. He would desperately like to be back in Rome to weigh in on all these ongoing matters and actually stabilise the situation in his favour, but he simply cannot. He is bogged down. From about this time, the Senate become more fearful of a successful Caesar than the existing Pompey. The Optimates and the Senate will side more and more with Pompey, not out of loyalty for Pompey, but out of a fear of Caesar. So Caesar is worried about several things happening once he returns to Rome. The first is he could be charged with the crime of bribery, which now has much harsher sentences. And 2, what would happen to his proconsulship once he returned? Could he be guaranteed some immunity via political elected position? That was probably his main concern. By the end of 52 BC, Pompey, with the influx of Senate support, is now super dominant. The Senate, who are normally really against Pompey for the longest time, it's like, we don't want to give you any more credit, we don't want to let you pass any bills, we don't want to let you do anything. They're now fearful of Caesar, and Pompey finds himself in this lovely position where he goes, finally, I have friends in the political world. They'll do what I want to do, and they'll help me, and they won't vote against me. This is brilliant.
Also, I introduced all these anti-corruption laws, and Caesar is so goddamn corrupt.
Yeah. They only backed it to a certain point. I find that kind of funny too. Oh, all right, somebody definitely did something really bad in 71 BC.
Absolutely.
At this point now, Pompey no longer actually needs Caesar. So Pompey would hope to establish a new relationship with Caesar, though, considering Crassus is now dead. But this relationship would definitely be Caesar is a subordinate to Pompey. Now, this is not going to happen. Caesar does not play second fiddle to anybody. Both men at this time, Pompey and Caesar, have vast amounts of money. Caesar has an acting army, and if need be, Pompey can raise troops. On the 22nd of July, Pompey is in Rome. Now, he was there to discuss the payment to some of his troops, but the big question the Senate had for him was what would happen to the legion that Pompey had loaned Caesar for use in Gaul. Should they be recalled? And if they were, would they answer the summons? It was agreed now that they should be recalled. But the next meeting was on the 1st of September that Pompey would attend, and they would discuss the recalling of Caesar. The discussion was, should the recalling happen on the 1st of March? Now we have some surviving, I love these ones where you have a little surviving quote or a little piece of information, because it's like for a moment you're a fly on the wall. But on that day where they're discussing the recalling of Caesar, a few questions are asked to Pompey. Quote, what will happen if someone imposes a vote on that day? End quote. Pompey replies, quote, it makes no difference whether Caesar intends to disobey the Senate's decree or put up someone else to prevent the Senate passing one. End quote. Follow-up question then to Pompey, quote, what if Caesar wants to be consul and retain his army? End quote. Pompey's response, quote, what if my son was to lay into me with a cudgel? End quote. This might need a little bit of explanation, but it's a Roman enigmatic phrase for a very unlikely event, but one that would be dealt with in real time. So the response is beautiful. It's like, what if my son was to smash into me with a club? And it's like, oh no, what is he doing? And you go, in those situations, you would definitely figure out what to do in real time. So it's fantastic. I love it. So yeah, what if my son wanted to lay into me with a cudgel? I'd do something.
Given, though, that you are expecting a possibly violent resolution, maybe you should make more concrete plans.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Like, if you've reached the point of writing to your son saying, please don't hit me with this cudgel, maybe be prepared for his response.
So from here, on the 29th of September in 51 BC, 4 motions are proposed to cripple Caesar. The first motion: Caesar's successor should be decided on the 1st of March in 50 BC. The second proposal: vetoes will be invalid on this date. That's a pretty big one. The third proposal: the Senate would discuss the retirement of some of Caesar's soldiers. And the fourth motion: only the provinces of Syria and Gaul should be made available for the allocation to ex-consuls. Now, on the day of the vote, numbers 2 and 4 were vetoed.
2 being the vetoes would be invalid.
I heard you like vetoes, so I vetoed your veto. They vetoed vetoes trying to follow it. They vetoed vetoes not being able to be vetoed. Oh, God. Anyway, and the other one was that only the 2 provinces, Syria and Gaul, would be made allocated. So what they're going to discuss is Caesar's successor, and they're also going to discuss the retirement of Caesar's soldiers. Because of this whole discussion, the political cat is out of the bag. So it really seems that the Senate are adamant to get Caesar cut down a few pegs. And this is going to be made very aware, not necessarily in real time, but very aware to Caesar of what is going on. Now, it should be noted while all of this is going on, Caesar might have been having secret messages and representative meetings between him and Pompey, but we just don't know. In 50 BC, Pompey's political dominance begins to slip. Now, the allies of Caesar dramatically step up to support him. Caesar also doubles the pay of his troops just to ensure their loyalty, and he gives them grain allotments, and this is pretty sad, but he gives them a bonus of slaves. The new consuls, Aemilius Paulus, is very supportive of Caesar. This support seems to have come from a bribe of 1,500 talents, which is an ungodly sum of money, to him from Caesar. So Caesar, because of his successes in Gaul, he has gotten his hands on so much money and funds and everything that is involved in a very successful campaign. And with that, he is going to bribe and grease the hand of every official and every political person that he can to try and get support. And the political class flock to him. So March 1st arrives. This is the proposed date. We're going to have the vote. We're going to see what happens. It's proposed that number 1, Caesar and Pompey should simultaneously surrender command. This is rejected. Second motion: Caesar should be replaced. That is immediately vetoed by a fellow called Curio. People immediately realise Curio is in Caesar's political pocket. It's like, why would you veto that? Because just reasons. Caesar's political tactics are very clear. Curio has to be in Caesar's pocket, otherwise he wouldn't use a veto on any of these actions, and he's going to proceed to veto all actions against Caesar. The Senate turned to Pompey for leadership because it's believed an invasion of Parthia was looking very likely, and Pompey was fixated on this. He is itching to be given command for this campaign. Now, the Senate would request that 2 legions be sent east to Asia and Syria to help deal with the potential Parthian threat. They propose that Pompey gives one and Caesar gives the other. So Pompey has the bright idea that, wait, I loaned a legion to Caesar. What if I ask Caesar to send me back that legion plus his own? And in that way, we can actually reduce Caesar's total legions by 2, and my legions don't go down by any number. Pretty underhanded, it's pretty clever. And Caesar is not too happy about this. So Pompey proposed that Caesar should give up his provinces on the 13th of November. Now, it's unclear why this date is used, but apparently it was deemed fair. Pompey is determined that Caesar should not retain any command again until he's elected consul. Curio refused all of these terms, and he would not offer any compromise. So on top of all of this, Pompey, shortly after these events, becomes ill. He's confined to his bed in Neapoli, which is modern-day Naples, and it's reported that Pompey's life was in grave danger. Now, out of character, Pompey writes to the Senate praising Caesar. This is possibly some kind of secret agreement, I don't know, but he's like, he's a cool guy, Caesar's really fun, la da da da, the kind of thing of like, isn't he great? And they go,
This relationship is just so back and forth. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
The reason why this might be part of some kind of secret agreement is they have had previous secret agreements, and there could be like a little clause at the bottom of like, in the unlikely event of my death, to make sure that you prop me up, or vice versa. I don't know. It's really out of character, and also maybe it's just a feverish death letter. It's the kind of like, on my deathbed I had a change of heart, and I decided Caesar's an okay kind of guy. Anyway, while Pompey's life is in grave danger, all across the peninsula of Italy, people are praying for the health of Pompey, and Pompey recovers. Now, according to Plutarch, this near-death experience results in a revised, more arrogant, even more confident, seemingly sure of divine protection Pompey, and that this drastically affects all of his future decision-making. Now, it should be noted, though, that Pompey was already a very superstitious man, so after this extra effect on his psyche is not necessarily unexpected, but he's going to be turbocharged in his self-belief. The legions that were loaned to Caesar now return to Pompey, and they report upon their return that there's low morale in Caesar's army. Now, this is almost certainly disinformation from the legions, who had been paid 250 denarii each by Caesar, which was probably done to give this report. But it has a similar effect on Pompey's confidence as the near-death experience. He kind of goes, whoa, maybe Caesar's camp is in absolute turmoil and chaos. And these guys are just feeding me this wonderful report that I'd love to hear, that Caesar is all over the place and his men don't trust him, they don't respect him, they don't whatever. But in reality, it's literally troops that used to be loyal to Pompey are now loyal to Caesar. And so after this, people are kind of going, all right, you've got some legions that were returned to you from Caesar, but if Caesar himself comes back, how are we meant to deal with these troops? And it leads to Pompey's very famous quote of where he could find troops to battle Caesar. And he says, quote, "Wherever in Italy I stamp my foot, there will spring up forces of infantry and cavalry." End quote. Little brazen. Now, because of the absolute political turmoil, the chaos, and the seemingly breaking down relationship between Caesar and Pompey, a full-scale civil war is now very likely. So more members of the Senate begin leaning towards Caesar, and Pompey, angered by this, that any more senators would consider jumping ship, he threatens to leave them and leave the city of Rome and leave it to its fate. In 50 BC, because of actions in Syria by Cicero and Cassius Longus, they nullify the Parthian threat for the foreseeable future. So attention can now be fully aimed at Caesar. 13th of November, that date that they just agreed upon for whatever reason, it came and went, and Caesar is still in Gaul. By the 1st of December, Marcellus tried to get the Senate united against Caesar, and he proposes two things. The first, Caesar be completely removed from command by sending a replacement commander. Now, this is not going to work. See Sulla, see what happens. We've learned in Roman history that if you send a commander to replace the really charismatic one, it just doesn't happen. You might as well be asking for a civil war. The second thing he proposes is he should strip Pompey of command shortly after Caesar has been stripped of command. So at this time, we still see that the Senate, they're very wary of Caesar. They give a bit of support to Pompey, but clearly they're still worried about him. It's just the case that Caesar is the biggest problem in the room at the moment, and once he's dealt with, they're still thinking of what do we have to do with Pompey. Curio, the ally of Caesar, he suggests that both men just straight up resign. It's voted on, and there's a 370 in favour with 22 against. So I think in the Senate's eyes, they have this idea, these are both incredible threats, we just want both of these men to go away. And they won't.
Sorry, just the fact that Curio is the one who proposes this too, it does sound very much like, now Pompey, you just resign, and then Caesar will resign right after you. It really feels like that could have been the tactic there.
It's so messy. It's so, like, this is such a back and forth game of nonsense of like, no, you go first, no, you, maybe you. We'll see what happens here. And you can see that the Senate is like a total paper tiger in this situation. Like, unless you've got legions, you can't command anybody to do anything.
They have neither legions nor, like, financial power to...
Yeah.
They've... So many of their own ranks at this stage have just been corrupted by money from Caesar. Or
oh, yeah.
So it's just like, they've just lost any power projection in any direction.
So from this point, Caesar moves from Gaul and crosses the Alps. Now this isn't an act of war, but it's very uncomfortable. Now upon hearing the news of Caesar's movements, the Senate follows up with an immediate 2-day debate with ex-consuls. Marcellus and his company decide to go to Pompey's house, and they thrust a sword in Pompey's hand and they ask him this, quote, "I and my colleague here instruct you to march on your country's behalf against Caesar. As for an army for this purpose, we give you the troops at Capua and elsewhere in Italy and whatever other forces you wish to raise." End quote. Now Pompey replies, quote, "If there's no better way," end quote. Now is this him being humble? Is this him being arrogant? Is this his usual, oh no, woe is me, the unknowns? You know? Like, have you got no better? Like, you could interpret that quote so many ways. If there's no better way, it's like, have you no better options? I'm at home in my house and you come to me handing me a sword saying, please deal with Caesar. Oh, anyway. But once again, in a time of crisis, the Senate's only option is to turn to Pompey, and it's all too common of a response, and civil war is almost entirely a certainty. Caesar, though, is no inactive Lepidus or a content Sertorius. Caesar is the next Sulla. We have no record of Pompey's strategy before the outbreak of the Civil War. It's likely he's planning behind the scenes as normal. That seems to be what he's doing, even when he's retired to his villa or whatever he's up to. But the records that survive would be from people who are not in the inner circle of Pompey's military planning. So he probably is meeting up with some of his officers and going, this is what we should be doing. But to the senators around, they're kind of blind to his internal planning. It's generally assumed that Pompey came to the conclusion that if Italy were invaded, it could not be defended against Caesar. Pompey's real strength is his veteran legions in Spain, the Roman navy, and his client states in the east. All of these people are going to have to be assembled as and when required. And if this happened, the plan would be to use a naval blockade to blockade Caesar, limit his supplies, and keep him penned in Italy. This would be a very ambitious play by Pompey, but in theory it is not beyond the scope of his logistical abilities. The really big hurdle for Pompey for this kind of a strategy would be to convince the senators to leave Rome. Now, when senators do leave Rome, they kind of abandon a lot of their political powers because powers are literally as senators in Rome. Leaving with Pompey on campaign would actually give him a lot more say than they would be comfortable to do. With Caesar's presence in the north now, the Senate wanted these would-be out-of-the-ground stamp legions to go and take care of him without any haste. Now their motives would be tremendously selfish because the majority of these senators have property in Italy, and they really wish that that property would be protected from Caesar and his legions and looting. So we know 3 things about Caesar at this time. He's armed with experienced veteran legions, he has taken the offensive initiative, and Caesar has gone to great lengths to spread disinformation regarding his legions' morale. We also know 3 things for Pompey. Pompey has troops with very little training available to him, he is lacking his veteran troops, and Pompey's current troops have lower morale and loyalty than Caesar's troops. So Pompey's plan of retreat makes a lot of sense. There is also the added bonus that while the Senate is away from Rome, they'd lose a lot of their constitutional powers and Pompey could campaign virtually unopposed. The end result would be a Pompeian win and not a Senate win. The 7th of December, Pompey leaves Rome to visit 2 legions in Capua. He confirms to Cicero that Caesar has broken with him, and it's noted that Pompey is not in good form. So even now, Caesar is trying to negotiate with Pompey, and he offers to give up all of his provinces and his army, with the exception of Illyricum and Gaul, and retain 2 legions, until he's elected consul. I love the way he proposes it. It sounds so great, and then the sting is in the tail of that whole statement. It's like, I promise to give up all of my provinces and my armies.
Except the important ones. Except all the ones that are the source of my power. And I'll hold off on using them until I get that little bit more power so it's official.
It's like, my God, man, you're very good at negotiating, except when it's, to pirates.
Yeah.
Oh, it's brilliant. This is fantastic, Hal. Pompey is in favour of this, but the Senate are not. So the 1st of January, Caesar proposes an ultimatum through Curio. He's going to lay down command if Pompey agrees to do the same simultaneously, otherwise he will march south to Rome. Now, Caesar knows Pompey would never agree to this, so this is a way to kind of diffuse responsibility from Caesar. It's like, I gave you an option, and you said no. What I do next is completely your fault. And I'm just going to march my army south like this, and if Rome is in the way, it's all your fault. So the consuls at the time are Cornelius Lentulus and Claudius Marcellus, and when they receive Caesar's ultimatum, they initially refuse to read it aloud in the Senate. Now eventually, the senators are kind of going, okay, sorry, you got a letter from Caesar, do you mind reading it out loud? And they're saying no. And then the tribunes kind of go,
it's just and
the tribunes go, do you mind repeating yourself and saying this out? Like, what did Caesar say? What did he propose? And eventually, when they are forced to read it aloud by the tribunes, there's kind of a stunned silence. And the ultimatum proposed by Caesar isn't even voted on. Instead, the senators have a very serious discussion as to the current state of the Republic and what is going on. How did they get to this state of affairs? They realise themselves just how bad the situation is. Even after this, there's one last offer from Caesar, and he's going to agree to his terms with an updated change. So this is the idea of, I will lay down my army and my provinces, but just leave me this time, not with 2 legions, with a single legion. But this is still a no-go. The Senate attempted one more vote to replace Caesar with Domitus Ahenobarbus. However, the tribunes Mark Antony and Cassius vetoed this proposal. Now, such was the anger and the frustration of these vetoes that Lentulus requested the 2 tribunes, Mark Antony and Cassius, leave the Senate House, or you could expect some violence. It is not cool. Mark Antony and Cassius have vetoed the proposal. The Senate is furious. They ask them to leave. You can expect some violence. But here we kind of see there's a serious problem in the Roman system with vetoes.
I mean, like, I don't think vetoes are ever a good idea in politics. The idea of having a veto always comes in when one side is like massively in power and they just think, how could this backfire? We hold all the cards. And then like 20 years later they don't, and suddenly it backfires. Like, it's just...
And they're like, how dare you use this political tool against us, that tool we implemented.
Yeah.
Vetoes are mad because on paper it makes sense. You go, oh, I'd like to have this thing where somebody can just not let that happen. And you go, yeah, but if you give it to somebody in any situation, it's the same with political pardons. That's nonsense.
Yeah. Like it's always important to have checks on power, but then it itself becomes a way for people to just totally abuse their power. Because even when they're not, you could have a totally dominant other faction in a political system, and if the other side still has a veto, well then, yeah, it's stupid.
But it is a very broken tool in the political world, and you can see you don't need. I think you don't need them. You need proper voting and proper systems and proper everything. The veto was invented in the Roman system to protect the poor plebeians of Rome. It was meant to be that the tribune of the plebs could go, whoa, you rich guys want to vote on something really important, and this affects all the poor people. I want to veto and make sure that doesn't happen. And it ended up just becoming this political super tool where every Roman who's like, I think we should vote to give poor people land, and like, veto.
Yeah. And I mean, and it is the thing, even the implementation, that's like a half-assed compromise.
Yeah.
Because obviously the real thing to do is, maybe we should let the poor people vote.
Yeah. Even
that would be the correct solution.
Sorry,
but
Carl.
That's not what they wanted.
That would be a democracy. We have a republic.
Oh God, sorry.
Yeah.
I flashbacks to arguing with Americans online about how the Electoral College is a dumb system. And it's just like, but it's not meant to be. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be the states. I'm just like, why?
Yeah, but yeah, it's silly.
But there are more people who want this thing than that thing. What? Why?
Oh, it's very silly. But yeah, that's the way that it is. If you're a republic, you're not actually a democracy. You might have democratic systems, but you're not actually a democracy. I think anyone who's listening to us, though, who has a knowledge of classical history, will be like, yeah, actually, we have a fair knowledge of this. Don't need to go too much into the depths. But we're seeing the problems here of the Roman Republic. But don't worry, it'll all be fixed when we have a Roman Empire.
A single transferable vote with proportional representation. If the Romans had just considered that, could have avoided all this.
But then Mark Antony couldn't sit down and go, I'm vetoing this. Good job, Mark. Oh my god.
Also, they're going to end up with so many independents just trying to get roads built in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I need to represent my constituency in Napoli, and I need to represent my constituency in Capua. It's messy. No one's really figured out this whole government thing yet, but I think people should maybe try. Caesar, anyway, is marching south. He captures 2 cities, and with the fall of these 2, Pompey lets everybody know it's time to abandon Rome. So, in January 46 BC, Caesar crosses the Rubicon. This is the point of no return. It is a definite, we are now officially at war. You are not meant to do this, but you're not meant to cross this river with troops. We know what your intentions are. No one can call your bluff here. This is what is going on. Now, actually, people who are fans of Caesar will often say Caesar was given this horrible ultimatum by the Senate, where they were going to implement these Pompey's laws, where he was going to be charged for bribery. He would probably serve some time in jail. He couldn't do his election unless he was there in person. There were all of these things where they gave Caesar this ultimatum, and Caesar then decided to start a civil war, and he really had no choice, and that's what he did. But ultimately, credit where credit's due and responsibility where responsibility should be. Caesar is responsible for Caesar's actions. Caesar is responsible for bringing violence into politics.
And just to double check as well, on a map, the Rubicon River, which is, it is a river that he crossed. It became a turn of phrase, but it is a literal river.
Yeah.
Look at it on a map, and you'll notice that to cross that, you've already gone through, in modern day, that's most of Italy's economy is north of that. And even historically, that is most of Italy's best farmland. You've already, crossed over into insanely valuable land. You just haven't reached Rome yet, but it's kind of once you're past this, the next thing of worth is Rome, kind of.
It's kind of well, we'll let you do whatever you want here, but no, you're definitely marching down Rome now.
Yeah.
But the kind of idea of, he's literally crossing the Rubicon, but Caesar is responsible for Caesar's actions. The idea of oh no, they could put me in jail for my crimes, it's you committed those crimes, buddy. You should probably be in jail.
They can't expect me to face the consequences of my actions.
Yeah. So Caesar is responsible for Caesar's crimes. As much as there is an ultimatum put to him by the Senate and by Pompey, at any point, he did decide to, illegally raise legions. He did decide to bribe people. He did decide to do these things. And ultimately he might be my back's against the wall. My only option is now a civil war, and this is what I'm going to do. It's you still decided to start a civil war. You still decided to be the next Sulla. And no one here is innocent. This is not there's good and bad. Both of these sides are terrible for their actions. The Senate are just a bunch of rich aristocrats who want to live on villas and just have that, they want to live the Hans Gruber lifestyle of sitting on a beach earning 15%, They just want to sit there living off an interest. And then Pompey just wants to be the biggest man in Rome, give me another triumph. And also still be incredibly rich and have all of these client states. And Caesar wants to be the biggest, best guy and the number one man in Rome as well. And we have these contrasting people and these contrasting values. We have horrible people doing horrible things to each other, proposing horrible ultimatums that will ultimately spiral into a civil war due to a combination of an abuse of vetoes and using political violence all the time. So let's just set the record straight. Nobody here is free of blame. Caesar will start a civil war, and the Senate will push his back to the wall so that was maybe his only logical option left, but he still does it. So anyway, Caesar has crossed the Rubicon. We're now officially starting a civil war. The senator challenges Pompey to please stamp his feet and raise that army. I like to imagine in his head, he's no, they will spring out of the ground.
He said
it would happen.
Why would Pompey lie?
So Pompey proposes the Roman people and the Senate leave the city of Rome immediately. And he declares that any senators who are willing to stay are allying with Caesar. So Pompey leaves on the 17th of January, and on the 28th of January, most people have followed his lead. But in a panic, they actually leave the treasury behind. Caesar is now marching in Rome. There's no concession that can be made to him. When he lands in Rome, he's effectively going to find a treasury where he desperately needs money, and he just landed with a big pile of money. Now, it's not all doom and gloom for Pompey. On the 22nd of January, one Titus Labienus, Caesar's supreme legate, catches up with Pompey and offers to join him. Now, we can't be fully sure of his exact reasons why, but there are a couple of reasons. Labienus is pissed at Caesar for starting a civil war. Now, Labienus is even more upset of not being informed by Caesar of this civil war so he could be part of it. And also, it's really important to note, Labienus had military connections with Pompey, and it stretches back 11 plus years, all the way back to 60 BC. Labienus feels Caesar has denied giving him credit for the victories in Gaul. So he's kind of like, I'm upset. I'm just, I don't like that a civil war started. I don't like that I wasn't invited to the civil war. You used to be one of my big buddies, Pompey, and also Caesar's stealing all my glory in Gaul. And lastly then, one of the last reasons, which is Labienus feels Caesar is showing more favour to Mark Antony. He's like, I'm afraid Caesar has a new best friend forever, and it's not me. It's Mark Antony, and I don't like him.
And that's a friendship that will never die.
Never. Oh, God. As I said, it's not all doom and gloom for Pompey now. He has Labienus, and Labienus provides invaluable intelligence to Pompey and provides excellent military ability to be part of Pompey's army. Now, Pompey realises that Caesar doesn't have as many troops as they first believed. Now, we didn't really kind of go into this, but when Caesar does invade the north and he does cross the Rubicon, the Senate don't know how many troops he has. They only have reports, and obviously reports can be inflated and rumours become wild, and they think like the whole army, everything Caesar's got is probably coming. They don't realise that he only crosses the Rubicon with a single legion, the 13th. Like, if they could get their stuff together in time, they might actually be able to hold him up right now. That is not
if
really...
If they hadn't left the treasury behind.
Yeah. So he's acting on the initiative. He's moving really rapid. He is trying to make as many gains as quickly as possible. He's very much on the initiative. But he hasn't brought everything with him. There's actually not a bad chance that what they could do here, considering he doesn't have too many troops. With that information, Pompey even considers attacking Caesar. Now, Caesar will buy time to raise more troops by buying time with new nonsense negotiations. Now, the Senate are busy raising some of Pompey's old legions in Italy, but they get a really poor response. Now, such is the disaster that the recruitment officers, whose job it is to levy these troops, don't even show their faces when it's kind of like time to report what have you got.
That quote is just looking worse and worse.
It is, it's getting really bad. So from here, Pompey, pretty alarmed, is going to enact his evacuation plan of Italy. And he urges his peer, Domitus, to make haste and join up with them immediately, and we're going to get the hell out of Italy. Now, note, Pompey possibly only informs people of these plans and gives them last-minute information for this evacuation and for all of his actions in Italy. So they really don't have any other option. It's kind of like the way I can make sure that I want you to do what I want you to do is just to give you the last-second order so you don't have a choice.
There's a real chance otherwise that a lot of people will just defect to Caesar's side if you don't kind of put them on the spot.
Very much so. Now, Pompey's rightfully worried that Caesar is going to reach Domitus's troops and cut them off before they can reach Pompey. Now, Pompey doesn't really have confidence in the newly raised legions, so he is urging again that everybody allied to him just meet up and we evacuate Italy. That is the plan.
He needs to stamp his feet louder. He needs to get the River Dance CD on and just go to hell.
So on the 15th of February, Caesar catches up with Domitus, he besieges his position, and then Pompey is completely furious, and he writes letters to Domitius, and he berates him, and he says, why didn't you just do what I asked you to do, meet me when you went to meet me, get here as quickly as possible, even though I gave you last minute confirmation, but that was what you were meant to do, you didn't do it, and now you're besieged by Caesar, it's your own fault. So Domitus, under siege, decides to secretly negotiate with Caesar. The news gets out to his troops, and Domitus's troops arrest him, and they surrender themselves to Caesar. It's Fort Sensible.
Yeah.
Literally.
It's Fort Sensible.
Caesar does his whole clemency thing, and he releases Domitus, and he returns 6 million sesterces to the troops of Domitus. But he also demands they make an oath to Caesar. So, great recruiting tool. Pompey initially wanted to garrison his armies in Sicily once they evacuate Italy, but he changes his plan to Greece in response to Caesar's rapid advancement through the peninsula of Italy. Now at this point, Caesar still seems hopeful that he and Pompey can somehow patch things up. It's like, I know we've gone this far, but we used to be bros. Now, Pompey is not willing to negotiate, especially without the presence and the agreement of the Senate. It is kind of insinuated here at this point, considering Caesar wants to open up negotiations with Pompey, that, Caesar's going to be playing first fiddle, Pompey's going to be playing second, and Pompey cannot agree to be a subordinate to Caesar. It's just not in his nature. In 49 BC, Pompey was annoyed with more than a few people, and he discussed the possibility of proscriptions from previous civil wars. And the quote is meant to be, this is kind of terrifying if you were part of Pompey's camp. And he just goes, quote, Sulla could do it. Why can't I? End quote. They go, oh no, it only took decades, but he realised what he can do.
This is really just shaping up to be a civil war where both sides are kind of terrible.
Oh, he's very, very, very good. So up to the last moment, but there is a successful evacuation where Pompey blockades the Adriatic Sea, and Italy is now completely left to Caesar, and Pompey raises as many men and supplies as possible as he can from his Greek client states. He's successfully gotten out of there, and it's total last minute, shooting arrows at Caesarian soldiers coming at them kind of a thing. They have just managed to get out right in the nick of time and evacuate all that they can to get to Greece. This is the new plan. But now Pompey has control of the Mediterranean Sea with his stronger navy, and he has control of the Adriatic Sea. He was not going to let Caesar really move out. And this might be a thing of, like the initial plan, keep Caesar penned in Italy, starve him out there. If he doesn't have access to a lot of money, if he doesn't have access to a lot of fodder and food and equipment, they might get bored. From here, Pompey had 5 legions successfully cross the Adriatic Sea into Greece, and he has 4 more there to join him. A portion of his army is veteran. It is a very small portion, and some of them are from the east, and some of them are even remnants of Crassus's troops from the Battle of Carrhae, but they've joined up with him now in Greece. Pompey's cavalry and his light skirmisher troops that he's gotten in Greece is like a list of the Eastern world. He's got light skirmishers that are dispensed evenly among his legions, so he has about 3,000 archers, 1,200 slingers, and 7,000 Eastern cavalry, and these would be the pride of the Eastern armies. Pompey's real strength, though, is in his 500 ship fleet. 300 of those ships are military ships, and the remaining 200 are transport.
That's a high ratio of military. Usually when you see big naval numbers, it's because they've just recruited in every little, just like fishing boat and thing like that was in the way. Like that's like 300 of them actually being dedicated military ships is huge.
Yeah, it is. So he has thorough control of the oceans here. And the transport ships now he's going to be controlling the flow of logistics, which is what he's really, really good at. The fleet is placed under the command of Publius, who hated Caesar a lot more than he loved Pompey. But then again, when you have a bucket poured over your head, that might be your response. The fleet's role, ultimately, they're not really going to be involved in military engagements unless that happens, but the fleet's role is to limit food shipments to Italy, with the goal of starving the armies of Caesar. So the fleet would also be expected to secure and provide food shipments to reach Greece and to reach the troops of Pompey. So it's a total idea of, you're going to make sure that Caesar can't get supplies and that I get as many supplies as possible.
I mean, based on everything we've learned from the first 2 Pompey episodes and everything we learned from the Caesar one, like, with what you know of Pompey and what you know of Caesar, this does feel like Pompey's best shot is like, he's good at logistics, he's not good at tactical warfare.
Yes.
He is a much better chance by starving him out than actually confronting him directly in battle.
Yeah. This is the long, long political game. It's what he's going to do. And he's going to do it well. You know, he's playing the big strategy, and the big strategy will kind of pay off for him. From this point onward, Pompey's largest hurdle now is to raise money to pay his enormous army. They've lost the treasury they left behind in Rome, and that was approximately 30 million sesterces, plus all the goods left behind in Italy. Like, it's not like the houses, in a rush, people are not going to be able to bring everything with them, so he's got all of that additional booty left in Rome. And Pompey's solution to his financial problems is to raise taxes in the east and spend his own personal fortune. Now, we learned from the last episode just how much money he has, and probably extra money he skimmed off the top. But it will tell you how rich he is, that he's able to fund this kind of a military campaign, with the limited resources he has, plus his own personal fortune. He did it a little bit in Spain, But this is going to be taken to like the next level. You might find this interesting, but Plutarch describes Pompey's camp at this time. Quote, Pompey was exercising his infantry forces at Beroea. They were a mixed crowd and in need of training. He, Pompey, however, did not sit idly by on the sidelines, but he took part in the training himself as if he were in the prime of his youth. It provided a great boost to the morale of the troops when they saw Pompey the Great, for all of his 58 years, fighting on foot in full armour, and then again on horseback, effortlessly drawing his sword at full gallop and resheathing it with ease. Also, at throwing the pilum, he displayed strength as well as accuracy, so that many of the young men could not better his distance. End quote. So it's a really fun little note to put in there, but like you'll see, he is, by this age, he should be an old man. You know, Pompey is meant to be like, he mightn't have a lot of years left in terms of if he dies of old age. But they're actually saying that, hey, when push comes to shove and he's on campaign, he's able to ride a horse perfectly. He's able to he's able to fight in full armor. He's able to throw a javelin further than most people. You know, it's kind of a wow. He's not all talk.
One of the funny things that seems to come up with Pompey in these episodes is that, like, one-on-one he can be really charming, but then as soon as he's in front of the Senate, he gets just really awkward or something, or can't make friends, or. But it feels like when he's just like hanging out, he gets on great.
Oh, that's his case. Yeah. Now, so part of Pompey's strategy, remember, he's trying to get as many troops as he possibly can. Now, the ones that he desperately wants, not necessarily needs, but wants, he has his veteran legions left in Spain, and he's got to get them back. So Caesar's plan to deal with this is to nullify and sort out those legions, those veteran legions, before Pompey can get his hands on them. So the Caesarian forces are doing kind of poorly in Italy. They don't have a lot of the resources. The blockades are working, but they're going to fare a lot better in Spain, where they're going to cost Pompey his Spanish legions that are stationed there. We will lead into Caesar's wins in Spain, and we'll take a look, Cathal, at the Battle of Ilerda. So this is a very interesting battle, because it's not the kind of battle where there's a mass rout. It's not the kind of battle where there's a dramatic charge or a dynamic maneuver or a little bit of tactics. It is a combination of a war of attrition against Pompey's legates and a combination of swift, decisive maneuvers that fully envelop and surround Pompey's forces and legions and force them to surrender. So this is a very strange battle. It's maneuvering. The casualties are tiny. There's only a couple of hundred people die in this, which, you know, for the thousands that are there is nothing in the grand scale of things. But with a combination of secretly dug trenches at night and secret maneuverings and taking of hills and countertakings, there is going to be a full surrounding and envelopment of Pompey's desperately wanted legions here. And they're going to actually just surrender to Caesar and nullify that entirely. So, Cathal, what does the history machine think of this, considering it's such a strange engagement, but it is a dramatic and dynamic win for Julius Caesar in the sense that he has cut him off?
This one is considered very impressive by the history machine. We're finally onto like a civil war, so it's finally like legion versus legion, and we're into like 50-50 battles again because we got so used with all of Pompey's battles being like, yeah, you're supposed to win, idiot. Whereas this here, it actually gave Caesar slightly under 50% chance to win. Maybe like 47% chance to win, which he overcame. And as you said, it's a funny one because like he just outmaneuvered them so thoroughly that everyone surrendered rather than there being much casualties. Which, again, in civil war, you kind of want to avoid big slaughters because that's going to, public opinion is not going to go on your side if you kill everyone, who's then going to be part of your country. But just out of curiosity, ran through the history machine twice. So obviously, for the actual numbers of casualties, which are only a couple of hundred, that's way below what's expected. But if you interpret that as like everyone, like the whole army surrendering, that if you interpret it as being casualties, then that's like 55% above expectation. That is massive. Like, if you had got into a bloody battle, you wouldn't have done nearly as damage with the average general as like.
Wow. Okay.
You would have probably had a lot more people successfully retreating in a normal battle, whereas now all these people are surrendered, they're out. they're out of the war. So it's extremely effective, an extremely effective battle. And, we said before, History Machine likes tactics, and this is all tactics. This is all, like, really careful micromanagement to just outmaneuver an enemy army and just force them to surrender with minimal bloodshed.
Well done, Caesar.
Yeah.
God, maybe we should look into the code of this thing, but the History Machine just seems to hate Pompey. It's like... It's like, because I was half expecting maybe with this, it'd be like, oh, okay, Caesar, maybe not as much, but like, no, it goes, no, I love Caesar. Caesar's brilliant.
Don't look into any bribes from Caesar towards the History Machine. A couple of 1,000 talents just coming my way to code him in, look favourable.
So, meanwhile, so the Caesarians are doing quite well. They have sorted out Spain, which is a detrimental blow to the logistics of Pompey. Meanwhile, they've had a second success in Africa, in the Battle of Utica in minus 43 BC, where Curio, the one who's pretty much in Caesar's pocket, he defeats the Numidians and has a nice Caesarian win. Now, it is followed up, though, by an immediate battle of the Bagdad River in the 24th of August, where Curio loses so drastically he kills himself. Now, sorry, I shouldn't be laughing at the idea of somebody killing themselves, but like it needs a little bit of an explanation here. So, for this battle, Curio falls for the age-old trick of the step retreat. Now, the Numidians only engage Curio in the second half of their battle with the cavalry for the engagement. They feign a flight, they pull out the Roman forces are hurrying after this cavalry, they're running in the hot sun, they're sweating, they're exhausted, and suddenly they realise we're out in an open plain where the cavalry can run and do havoc, and they are completely surrounded, and they are taken out by some of the best cavalry that the ancient world can provide, the Numidian cavalry. These are the cavalry of Hannibal. These are the cavalry that are so important for the Battle of Zama. They're so important for the Battle of Cannae. They are some of the best cavalry in the ancient world. And Curio is not a good commander. In fact, for his earlier win, it is in Caesar's commentaries, but they kind of are alarmed that he doesn't follow up on things. They're like, oh, okay, the enemy's retreating, you should probably chase them. And then the next day, or for the next big battle, it's like, the enemy are retreating. They go, no, you don't follow those ones. You don't do that. So, Cathal, we'll ignore the Battle of Utica. That was kind of a straightforward engagement between Curio and the Numidians. But the follow-up battle, the Battle of the Bagdad River, how does the History Machine interpret Curio's loss here? And now this is a loss that's so bad that he kills himself on the battlefield.
Yeah, well, this is one that, as you said, describing the tactics in this one, this is an army setup the History Machine has seen before, especially up to this point in history. It just keeps working, of doing the feigned retreat thing and just having this big cavalry dominant army. So the History Machine was like, yeah, Curio's going to lose this. It gave a very low chance to actually win this battle.
I love, Cathal, that the History Machine has learned what countless Chinese generals and countless, people fighting steppe nomad archers have never learned is the feigned retreat. The History Machine has gone, oh no, it's doing the feigned retreat.
It's like, oh, I think I see what's coming here. Yeah. So it doesn't give much credit to Varus on this one. It was just like, you have the right army composition to take this on. But as often happens with this army, the casualties dealt are way above. It's 42% above expectation. So, yeah, this was kind of a crushing one.
But kind of as a rule of thumb, if you have, and the History Machine seems to acknowledge this, but the rule of thumb is if you have superior cavalry and cavalry dominance. Now, this changes from time to time and battle to battle and, part of the world to part of the world. But if you do have cavalry dominance, you're almost always the favourite. It just kind of goes, yeah, you've got the maneuverability, you've got the troop type, you've got the, you have the ability. There are exceptions, but if the enemy's got more cavalry than you, you're probably not in a good place.
Before you have mechanical solutions to this, it is a very hard to overcome problem of just horses go faster than people, and they're way heavier than people. Those two things in combination make them really hard to fight.
Yeah, it's true. But even another thing to note about it is if you are a cavalryman, you're probably an army regular as well. You're worth a lot more than a guy who's just been given a spear on the day, or, somebody who they're like, listen, join that formation and fill up the ranks there and become something. But if you're a trained cavalry warrior, you're probably, a very, very dangerous person.
And if you're a cavalry archer, it really is the thing of like, you've trained in this, you can hit them, they can't hit you. And maybe they can don enough armor so that you're not going to do that much damage either. But then you also have the maneuverability that you're probably not going to get pinned down. So it's just really hard. You're just too hard to hit.
Way too much. This is a very big note I wanted to mention as well, and it just shows the arrogance of Curio for this situation. He left 2 legions behind in Sicily when he was heading to Africa because he felt cocky enough that the numbers he'd have would be enough to deal with the forces in Africa. Not a good commander, not a good guy in terms of logistics, doesn't bring everything with him, and leaves 2 whole experienced legions behind. Now, actually, you know what? This might have been a good thing, because he probably would have lost them all. But that's the situation. So the summary is, Caesar has done really well in Spain, but the Caesarians have not done very well in Africa. So Pompey has a win in Africa, and Caesar has a win in Spain. The win in Spain is probably worth a lot more. Now, Africa obviously gives them the links to the grain and the food and the supplies and the bits and pieces, but losing those veteran legions is going to be detrimental to Pompey in the long run.
It was kind of a keystone within his overall strategy, and now he's lost it.
Yes. Now, he can compensate it with more troops, but we'll go into that later. It's just not quite the same. So in 48 BC, Caesar is elected dictator by Caesar. Oh, I love how he can do this. It's wonderful. It is wonderful. So with phenomenal energy and effort, Caesar organises an army of 12 legions to muster, plus the accompanying cavalry, and he's in a position to bring the fight to Pompey. At the end of 49 BC, Pompey has assembled his army, and he's debating a continuation of the blockades of Italy or a counter-invasion to go back to Italy, as he had been granted supreme command of the war by the Senate. With the loss of his veteran Spanish legions, though, the blockade seems like a more prudent strategy. However, Pompey receives alarming news. Caesar has successfully caught Publius off guard, and he's sailed 7 legions, and he's managed to land them on the eastern coast of the Adriatic. Now, it's a fun side note. Publius was caught off guard because he believed the weather would still be unsuitable based on the time of year according to the Roman calendar.
Oh.
However, this is going to get good. The Roman calendar actually needed correcting. Now, this is a technical task that is the responsibility of a very specific priest in Roman society who had, due to other pressing issues, not made the necessary corrections. Now, that priest in question is the Pontifex Maximus, aka Caesar.
But Caesar told me he wouldn't be able to invade on this day. How was I to know that he could invade? So the calendar is effectively... The Roman calendar is very messy because it's a lunar-based calendar at this time. Now, Caesar will correct it later, but it's a lunar-based calendar. And they have to make these corrections. It is funny because that just feels like such like a... Sorry, this is an aside, but just Caesar having that role, that feels like just to like throw another title on the pile kind of job. But he genuinely did a great job of improving the calendar later on. Like, he obviously had some enthusiasm for this task. He did.
Actually, I'll go into it because it is kind of funny. The Roman calendar at this time is based on the lunar calendar, and you go, okay, that's fair. And, it's the lunar cycle, and they add and remove days to kind of go, we need to correct what time of the year we're in. And every few years, if you don't do this, it can get wildly out of, it can get wildly out of control. So because Caesar, for the better part of a decade, hadn't made any changes, according to Publius, he's like, well, I looked at my calendar, the old Julian calendar, and it says we're in winter, so he can't possibly cross. And then Caesar goes, well, I made my corrections, and now it's actually technically spring, so I will. Now, Caesar will correct this calendar, and he will correct it. When he is in Egypt, he'll observe the Egyptian calendar, and he'll go, oh, you guys use a solar calendar and not a lunar one, and that seems to work better. And you have 360 days plus 5 bonus days at the end of the year. So what you guys seem to do is you have 12 months, and each of those months has exactly 30 days, which is nice, and then you have 5 bonus days at the end of the year. And every 4 years, you have a 6th bonus day. He goes, oh, that makes a lot of sense. That's really fun. I like that. But Caesar being Caesar decides to go, my favourite months will have 31 days, and other ones will not have as many days. And also, turns out Caesar really hated February, so he decided to give February only 28 days. Now, the 28 days is very specific because he had to give an extra day for a leap year. He never wanted February to have 30 days. So he went, even in the event of a leap year, I really hate this month.
I mean, it is like February is a bit of a drudgy month.
It is a drudgy month. Yeah, I can see what's like it. Yeah. And doesn't come to a shocker, but July is his favourite month. But which he gives conveniently 31 days. He probably would have given it 32, but yeah, it might be a little too much. But yeah, so Caesar is, that's one of his jobs as the Pontifex Maximus, as the priest. He is meant to be in charge of the calendar. And he is, and he makes these corrections, and he ends up adopting a solar calendar. But the one before is the lunar one. He's meant to make the corrections. He didn't. People were running on calendars that were effectively out of date. And because of this, he's able to cross 7 legions and land them in Greece.
It's still kind of a lame excuse. The Adriatic is so narrow. You if your job is guarded, you need to be vigilant every day, be checking the weather as it is every day. Like, it's not going to take much time to cross, even in ancient times.
Yeah. So, I think you're very right, Cathal. So, Caesar, with his successful landing, he offers terms of peace, but any negotiation at this point would be a certain defeat for Pompey because Caesar has elected himself dictator and consul. So what's left of the Senate in Rome would have to be loyal to Caesar when business returns to normal. God, these ridiculous technicalities. It's like, I'm dictator because I made myself dictator, and if we all decide to come to a peace agreement with me as dictator, we'll just return and I'll effectively have the job I want to have. Oh, Caesar. Pompey gives no reply to Caesar's latest peace terms. Because he isn't even touching this. So Pompey orders his army to head towards Apollonia with forced marches. The armies of Caesar and Pompey will eventually come into range of each other, and Pompey's camp and Caesar's camp will kind of withdraw, and they'll wait for upcoming reinforcements. They don't really want to engage each other just yet. They both have their reasons, but they won't be engaging. They're both going to try and get reinforcements. Pompey outnumbers Caesar 9 to 7 legions at this time. But he is very unwilling to give a pitched battle because so many of Caesar's legions are hardened veterans and so many of Pompey's legions are just new recruits. So on paper he looks a lot better, but the whole veteran thing, we'll come into it in a little bit, but that's going to make a much bigger difference. Pompey is waiting for 2 more legions under Scipio to arrive to swell his ranks. These would be experienced legions, so it's important that he gets them. And he's going to try and cut off supplies to Caesar by sea. As the armies are so close, many cavalry skirmishes are going to occur. Aside, Biblius dies from exposure on the open sea.
Okay, maybe that was a more treacherous voyage than I was giving him credit for. Let's throw my previous comment.
Poor guy. God, he doesn't go down very well in history. I don't think he's...
I mean, he goes down as the shit bucket guy. It's an awful legacy.
It is an awful legacy. So Biblius died from exposure on the open sea. Pompey does not immediately replace him with a new naval commander, and instead he delegates the responsibility to the remaining naval officers. It's like, you sort it among yourselves, but I am putting somebody else in charge of this hot mess. Caesar's troops are encouraged by Caesar, and they fraternise with Pompey's troops. And Labienus, alarmed, thinking how this ended up the last time Sulla was in Greece, he quickly ends this, and Labienus immediately forbids any contact with any of the sides. He's like, do not talk to Caesar or Caesar's troops.
One guy learning from the past.
Actually, Labienus is in such a unique position because he might be one of the only legates who's, served for both guys. So he has such intimate knowledge of both camps and both processes and both people and both, ways. And he's also such a talented commander. But yeah, he very quickly kicks onto this. He's like, okay, hold on. If Caesar's troops are talking to our troops, this is a problem. Nip this in the bud immediately. No one is allowed to talk to anybody. Immediate, no communication. In late March, the stalemate is broken. Mark Antony transports 4 legions with favourable winds on the sea, and he meets up with Caesar. Now, Pompey is going to try and prevent these 2 armies from combining. So, as an interesting story, this is just to explain the difference between veteran legions and new recruits or just regular legionnaires. Because it's often brought up all the time that, these veterans are worth so much more than regular legions, but sometimes it's good to give a good example of situations where you have a veteran legion and you have, a new recruit legion, and you see them both in action. So during this crossing, with Mark Antony transporting his 4 legions, 2 ships sail slower than the main fleet. One of them happens to be a ship with 200 veterans the other happens to be a ship with 220 new recruits. So they both drift off course, and they're both intercepted by Pompeian forces. So the 220 new legionnaire recruits, on their wayward ship, they end up being intercepted by the naval forces of a Crassus. Not the same Crassus, it's another Crassus. So these 220 new recruits, they're given assurances that if you surrender, no harm will come to you, and it'll all be fine, and that you can lay down your arms, you will be safe, if and only if you surrender. Otherwise, expect a naval attack. The new recruits are completely distressed. They don't know what to do. They're panicked. They're talking among themselves, and they decide their best course of action is to surrender. Now, once they've surrendered their arms, Crassus reneges on his promise, and he has them all killed. Meanwhile, the second ship, the veteran ship, with 200 veterans, they are also surrounded by Crassus. And when he surrounds it, he makes the same offer. He sits them down. He tells them the idea of there'll be assurances that if you surrender, no harm will come to you. Just lay down your arms. That would be that. Now, the veteran troops, being veterans, they stall it with negotiations. And then, in the middle of that night, they run their ship aground on the shore. And they hop out, and they immediately get onto land, and they start evacuating. Crassus would find out that this has happened, and he immediately sends 400 cavalry and some accompanying marines to engage them on land, only to have the Caesarian veterans defeat them soundly, while supposedly taking no casualties. These victorious veteran legionnaires will then safely, with no maps, no GPS, no contact, no anything, make their way across Greece and meet up with Caesar's army. So, that is the difference between veterans in the legionnaires of Rome and new recruits. They're able to act on that own initiative. They know exactly what to do. They fight as a single unit. They seemingly take no casualties, and they are just able to do operations like this with no problems. It's very impressive. So you can see why Pompey is really reluctant to have his new recruits engage with veteran legions. It's like, I need to have veteran legions to take on other veteran legions. Pompey decides to break camp now that Mark Antony's trying to meet up with Caesar. He's going to march to a pass northwest along a river which he knows Mark Antony must cross to get to Caesar quickly. So the locals around this region are not loyal to Pompey, and they had troops near there that are loyal to Pompey abandon the area. Mark Antony is made aware then of the potential ambush by these Greek locals, and he stayed put, instead sending a message to Caesar of the situation and letting Caesar travel the long way around and combined later than expected, but safely. To avoid a trap himself, Pompey withdraws to Dyrrhachium.
No one's going to mess with these Greek locals.
Some good news for Pompey though. His son Gnaeus was doing well with the naval actions against Caesar, and he limited supplies to Caesar and managed to burn 30 of the warships in the process. So, they're doing well on the naval side. Now, shortly after this naval loss, Caesar lines up his army. He's enticing Pompey, come on for an attack, but Pompey does not take the bait. The next day, Caesar retreats eastward. Now, it becomes apparent via scout reports Caesar is intending to cut Pompey off at Dyrrhachium. And Pompey has been outwitted once more. He has to deal with this as quickly as possible. Pompey might have reached Dyrrhachium first, had he left immediately, but he decides to rest his troops instead. He's making this decision. Caesar, on the other hand, to ensure that he reaches there before Pompey, force marches his troops 55 kilometres, which is about 34 miles, over mountainous terrain, absolutely exhausting them in the process.
Which is interesting to think, like, had Pompey taken the bait, kind of like facing an exhausted army, like it was a total bluff.
Yeah. There's all these little moments. Things like this going to make all the big difference. Now, we're going to see where this is going, because the two strategies are going to come into contact. Pompey's complex but, effectively done out strategy of cutting off Caesar for supplies and Caesar's quick taking the initiative. We're going to see what's actually going to happen between them. But at all costs, after this quick march, Pompey now needs to control access to Dyrrhachium via sea and limit Caesar's supplies. So Caesar has an exhausted army that is force marched over some of the worst terrain imaginable, and Pompey's plan is now cut them off from supplies, do not give them access to goods. Pompey establishes a new camp on Petra. This is an area of very rocky terrain. Pompey knows Caesar has little access to food. This is because Pompey had himself ransacked the area beforehand, so he knows, there's nothing there. And Pompey's superiority in cavalry is going to ensure that Caesar cannot forage safely with his own cavalry. Caesar's next move is a surprise. Caesar's troops begin occupying rough, rugged terrain to the east and the southeast of the position. And Caesar's troops start making fortifications, and they fill in any existing gaps with earthworks. Caesar's about to pull a Gaul. So Caesar's motivations, and we know these are his motivations because he tells them himself in his commentaries, they're threefold. The first is to prevent Pompey getting fodder for his animals, thus rendering his cavalry ineffective. His second reason is this would enable Caesar to now forage effectively. And his third reason is he wants to reduce Pompey's standing in foreigners' eyes within his army by refusing an open battle. Two can play at that game, so Pompey doesn't want to attack until he's reinforcement legions, so he begins building his own forts along his side, along his hills, and filling in his own earthworks. So they're having a little bit of a building competition. Caesar notes a very important and contested hill, that's the hill of Palamia, and it was denied to him by Pompeian archers and slingers and artillery. So he really needs that hill, but he just cannot take it. Now Pompey at this time is not keen on killing Caesarian Roman troops that retreat from these skirmishes. This is a civil war. Every Roman that dies is, every citizen that dies is a Roman. Every vote counts. They don't like civil war is the biggest problem with them in the long run is obviously the political destabilization and whatnot. All that aside, you're killing your own men. And the idea is Pompey does not want to end a lot of Roman lives. So if there's troops running away, we don't shoot them. We don't hit them with artillery. We don't do these things. They are our troops. The wall in the fort game continues. They're going to continue building and pulling across and keep building these fortifications. Even with all these impressive buildings, we're going to see what is it like at this time in Pompey's camp, because Cicero writes about the incompetence of Pompey's camp at this time. And quoting Cicero, he says, quote, "Firstly, the forces, neither numerous nor warlike. Secondly, apart from the commander and a few others, and I'm talking about the leaders, the rest had eyes only for plunder in the war itself. And their conversation was so bloodthirsty that I dreaded the thought of victory. Men of the highest rank were heavily in debt. The only good thing was the cause they were fighting for." End quote. So Cicero is not a fan of all of this. He thinks Pompey's camp is effectively filled with people who, just want to make a lot of money from all these wars.
Basically mercenaries at this point, yeah.
And also, Cicero is naturally urging peace terms because the Senate kind of want this to be wrapped up and to go home and to return to their normal lives and kind of say, yeah, just wrap up with Caesar, deal with this. We don't like land campaigns. We're not normally on these things. We're not normally in these positions where we don't have a lot of say for a long time. It's just not, we're not cool with this. But by July's end, Caesar had successfully completed the walls surrounding Pompey. Caesar was short on food, but with his completed wall, he could now safely forage and acquire local supplies. Caesar cuts off streams that are flowing into Pompey's camp, and Pompey's troops would hastily start digging wells for water, but these turned out to be ineffective. So now we found the situation where Caesar has managed to actually cut Pompey off from supplies and enable himself to actually try and forage for some of his own. The fortunes are starting to reverse. This lack of water could now result in Pompey's army losing all of their animals and many of their troops via dehydration. So Caesar's walls have to be breached.
So we've kind of entered a situation where the opposing general turns out to also be kind of good at some of these logistics things, while also being way better at the tactical side.
Oh yes, yes. So Pompey had a false message intercepted that provided intelligence of a fake surrender of him by the inhabitants of Dyrrhachium. Now instead of this imminent surrender, Pompey and his troops launch a three-pronged attack against the forts along the centre of the line against Caesar's forces. One of these attacks, under Pompey's legates, fails to breach the defences and they lose about 2,000 troops in the process. Caesar escapes an ambush near Dyrrhachium, and Pompey is reinforced with more cavalry, but this time it leads more pressure to go to an all-out open battle, which doesn't occur. Pompey's troop morale is falling, and it's falling fast. To up the morale, Pompey lines up his army a safe distance, albeit, but a safe distance. He lines them up along the fortifications of Caesar. Pompey is keeping face. Now, here's an example of where mad, crazy, random stuff just affects the history of the world. And as a stroke of luck, 2 Gallic cavalry commanders from Caesar's camp defect to Pompey. Now, the reason they defect is to escape punishment because they just happened to be embezzling the cavalry's pay. With them, they bring very detailed intelligence of Caesar's camp, Caesar's fortifications, and very importantly, Caesar's patrols. And using this, Pompey plans a massive offensive along the walls near the sea. Caesar's building a second wall near the sea at this time, but it is not finished. So, this is going to lead to all of this built up, all of these setups. We're going to have the final part, the final section for the Battle of Dyrrhachium. I'll go into this because this attack comes in 3 waves. The first wave, 6 legions launch a frontal assault on the fortifications. The second wave, there's archers and slingers and light infantry with helmets and wicker shields. They land behind the walls of Caesar and they start attacking the Caesarian troops. The third wave, the 9th Legion of Caesar is routed along with its small accompanying forces. Now Pompey immediately, having gained this ground, builds fortifications on the area he has just taken, and he establishes a camp here with 5 legions. When Caesar hears of this, he sends an overwhelming force to the new camp. But earthenworks that are being built there hinder his troops' movement and effectively prevent a massacre by the Caesarian troops killing the Pompeian troops. Then, the Pompeian cavalry comes to the rescue. Now the 5 legions of Pompey join the fray and they engage in a swift counterattack. But they fail to press the advantage by following up with the cavalry after the rout of Caesar's troops. It is said by Caesar that should he have followed up with this attack, it would have all been over. However, it should be very much noted that Pompey's cavalry and his infantry would have encountered the same issues of earthenworks that Caesar's troops did if they tried to chase them. Caesar, though, considers this lack of follow-up as a major flaw by Pompey and writes that if Pompey followed up, he might have ended the Caesarian army once and for all. Now, even though this is a win for Pompey, Caesar only lost about 1,000 troops and Pompey even significantly less. So, Cathal, what does the History Machine think about this win of Pompey over Caesar at the Battle of Dyrrhachium?
The History Machine's verdict is kind of similar to yours and Caesar's. This was kind of Pompey's big chance. The win over expectation, even though it's a Roman versus Roman army, the win over expectation is not that high. It expected Pompey to win. It thought this is a great chance. His army is nearly twice the size of Caesar's. Caesar's army's fortifications have been kind of, nullified by the fact that they have intimate knowledge of all the goings on, the exact state to which they're built, everything else. So definitely thought yes, he should be winning this one, and he did. But the casualties dealt are way below expectation. The casualties suffered by Pompey in the process, it's about 20% more than expected. So you can see that, the History Machine also is kind of surprised he didn't press the attack, he didn't follow up. And as you said, this might have been hindered by
pretty much terrain,
the terrain, the fact it was a building site, might have been hindered just, again, as we said before, he didn't want to attack fellow Roman soldiers.
That's true too.
Even if they were fighting for the other side. But the History Machine, kind of like Caesar, he felt he should have pressed this attack. It could have been a really significant victory, whereas instead it was just another battle that happened, and there was nothing truly decisive that came out of it. And just also, as kind of shows there, he took 2,000 casualties. That's kind of more than you want to do if you're not really, it's 2,000 out of 50,000. It's maybe not the biggest percentage we've seen, but still it's more than he would have wanted to take in a battle that he just had such a good chance of winning, and winning kind of cleanly.
Now the numbers are inflated, but then again the History Machine kind of factors that in as well, and here and there. It's just a case of, we're getting the reports from Caesar. You'll never believe how many troops he had. But it's interesting that the History Machine agrees with Caesar.
No bribes were given from Caesar.
Oh, very, very, very good. Okay, now you can imagine, though, the behaviour in Pompey's camp is ecstatic. We have won. Hooray. Fantastic. Brilliant. Now, this is where, and he's done it a few times, Pompey has failed to follow up on this, but he has failed, let alone to chase down Caesar's troops. He's failed to see where do Caesar's troops withdraw to. So they haven't followed up on anything. The next morning, Pompey finally discovers the enemy's army movements and he sends cavalry to follow them, but with no luck. He goes, okay, we're now actually not sure where the Caesarian army has gone to.
I know that Pompey's had maybe a break between wars and he's gotten older and maybe he's gotten overly confident. It definitely feels like he's lost a touch because when he has, this reputation as the master of logistics, failing to follow up on your enemy's movements, where they've withdrawn to, like, if your specialty is in logistics, you can't then use that. You don't know where they are. You don't know where you need to be cutting off supplies to or, building up your own supply. That's a bad misstep for him, and that actually seems out of character in terms of what he is usually strong at.
And it could be age, it could be it could be a number of things, but it has happened. Now, we'll come to some more criticisms of Pompey later and praises, but it's a problem. He didn't do that. But after the recent win and the breaking through of the fortifications, Pompey's troops are noticeably lax. They slow their progression to a snail's pace. They start collecting goods. They start collecting baggage. They start collecting booty along the way. A lot of them are heavily in debt. So this lets Caesar's troops get a 13-kilometre or 8-mile lead on Pompey, which is not good. So for the next 3 days, Pompey tries to close this gap, but he's got no luck in doing so, considering most of his army is just carrying goods with them. And not even supplies, just riches.
It's hard to move when you have a big bag that just says swag on the side.
Yeah. So Caesar reaches Apollonia and Pompey calls off the chase. He's like, all right, we can't close this gap. So any chance for Pompey to capitalise on the recent win is now completely lost. Caesar writes in his commentaries that he believed if Pompey's lack of follow-up cost him the war, but, right at this point in the feeling in Pompey's camp is that, they're like, it's won, it's over. Like, if you were to be a soldier in Pompey's camp at this time right now, they would tell you the war is over, Caesar has lost, it's done, we've won, it's almost time to go home. Pompey is saluted by Imperator by his troops, so, hooray, he's got that kind of thing. Pompey, though, has the grace not to use this title or add the laurel leaves to his standard because this title was earned by a win in a civil war. So he's very much of the opinion, hey, we can't celebrate this. So even if Pompey were to win this and to go back, he's probably not going to have a triumph because this is a civil war. And all these other triumphs, even though they did happen during civil wars, he is celebrating those triumphs by beating like local tribes and different people. But he is in Greece with the local tribes fighting against Caesar. So you can't really claim any like, oh, I went to Greece and I defeated some Greeks.
This really feels like a microcosm of overall you just see Caesar being so much more decisive and cutthroat throughout the Civil War, where like he's like Pompey is arguing, it's like, actually, shouldn't use that title. It's not really politically correct to use that title. And Caesar is just breaking every single rule and smashing everything along the way and just declaring himself dictator. Like, it's just so...
I'm dictator. Who said so? Me. Oh, wow. Yeah.
I hate people who complain about political correctness gone mad, but it's gone mad when you're focusing on that instead of, defeating the guy who's declaring himself dictator. It's the time where you kind of need to set aside these arguments and go defeat the guy declaring himself dictator.
Yep. So at this point, even though they have the big win, there are signs that Pompey's legates are acted up. Now, normally, Pompey would have selected his own Walland campaign, but the army is now a mixture of people who would have been his veterans and would have been his officer corps, but there's also interwoven with them a mixture of people who believe that Pompey owes his position to them, and they are very dissatisfied at how the war is being waged. Now, keep in mind, there would have been no lack of advice or armchair general support from the senators and the legates, what should have been done, on what should be done next, how they would have fought this war, and that all seems to add a lot of pressure and additional stress to Pompey. Most of the Pompeians want to pack it up right now with the win from Caesar, head home and pick up where their political careers have left off. Now, Pompey pleads with them, please do not do this. It would be a complete and utter military disaster. Caesar will almost certainly use this opportunity to head east, take taxes, take goods, recruit men, and come right back to Italy, and we would put us all back in square one immediately. Now, once again, The senators are still like, no, we still want to go home. So
This problem started because Caesar got too rich and powerful from invading Gaul. Now he's going to invade the richest part of the empire.
yeah.
This is like kicking the can down the road, but the can is like going to swell in size tenfold. Like in the meantime, it's
Yeah. Some of these senators are definitely not military men. As much as they're political great, like it's like, no, sorry, you need to end this. There's no like, oh, he's beaten. It's like he's not beaten as long as he's alive and as long as he has, as we counted, 10 legions. You know, it's like he has legions with them. This is still a very, very big problem.
It's very one swallow doesn't make a summer kind of thing. You know, they won one battle and it was not very decisive.
Yes, yeah. We killed a couple of thousand of them. We're done. You know, it's like, no, you're not. Once again, adding to the theory that history is driven by random, stupid things. After this battle, the Gallic cavalry that had deserted Caesar to join Pompey, they bump into some Caesarian scouts. And whoa, they recognise one another. So, as they recognise one another, they realise, oh, whoa, this would be a great time to have a catch-up chat. What's going on? How are you? And what's the news? And, you know, how have you been keeping since you've joined sides or done whatever? So, the cavalry and the scouts are going to completely disregard all military intelligence and proceed to have a full, detailed account on both sides of the events during and after Dyrrhachium. The current state of affairs, the positions of the army, the locations, the troop size, everything. Could they not have talked about the weather? Right? So, keep in mind, this is Gallic cavalry that left Caesar, joined Pompey, met up with scouts that obviously, you know, these also must have been, this doesn't bode well for the Celtic people.
Hey, they did their job. They got information about the other side. It only cost them giving up all the information about their own side too.
It did. So news from this encounter reaches both camps and they confirm it. They go like, you told them what and where and why and how? It's like, but we also know what, where, why and how. So the two armies now, being blind for a while, completely know each other's events, locations, true everything. They know everything about each other. So Domitus wheels around to head south and meet up with Caesar, and Pompey likewise heads southeast and confirms this new intelligence.
Great strategists do love having their work compared to a game of chess, and chess is a game of perfect information.
Yes.
So for that comparison to work, you have to know everything about one another.
Yeah, and at this point, right now, they do. So on the 5th of August, Pompey reaches Pharsalus with 9.5 legions and 7,000 cavalry. Now the strategy for Pompey seems to be attrition. He's not going to gamble with Caesar's luck. At this time, because of their positions, because of where they are, because where the armies are located, and because of Pompey's control of the sea, Caesar has no access to the sea, he has no access to any fertile land for supplies, he has no way to escape, and he is firmly penned in. Now relations in Pompey's camp went from bad to worse. He's accused of prolonging the war in order to remain in control. They're kind of like, hey, you know, remember when Mithridates died and you were upset? It's the kind of thing of like, they go, no, maybe you just really like being in charge. So, you know, you should just wrap this up and go home. We think you're only doing this so you can be in control. So the senators are nitpicking at him, and so are some of his legates. They're like, this is all happening now because you want to stay in control, because you're the old man and you finally have a purpose again. But not anymore. You need to wrap this up. You need to finish it. So he's accused of prolonging the war in order to remain in control. Ahenobarbus openly refers to Pompey around the camp as Agamemnon, King of Kings. So that'll tell you what the air is like. And other legates are demanding that when this war is over, Pompey should probably stand trial for abandoning Spain, leaving those veteran legions to their fate. They're going from bad to worse, and the complications are getting pretty bad. But Domitus and Scipio are arguing, now that they think that this war is going to be wrapped up, who among them should be made the Pontifex Maximus after Caesar is dead.
Oh, this is so stupid and messy.
Yeah.
Again, if this was dramatized, I would now be shouting at the screen that they're all being so goddamn stupid.
I know. It's madness. Also, the Senate now and the who's who of Rome are deciding who are going to be the consuls for the next few years. And there's also, to be noted, at this time, a rumour of a cavalry coup to kill Pompey once this is all over, because they don't want another potential Sulla. They want everything to go back and there'll be no Pompey and no Caesar. Now that last part is just a bit of a rumour, but just keep in mind, that's a possibility. Even though, and I have to stress this, Caesar has no chance. He is cut off from supplies, he is cut off from food, he is cut off from men, he is penned in, he has nowhere to break out. All he has are troops that are loyal to Caesar. They will get hungry, they will get thirsty, they will run out of money, they will run out of supplies, they will have to start eating their horses. In this war of attrition, Pompey has him completely surrounded. Now, the grand strategy, with a combination of luck and information, this war has actually, if you look at it from this point, Pompey has Caesar. It is over. If this was a game of chess, it'd be like checkmate in two. All Pompey has to do is not blunder. That's all he has to do. Now, we have to factor in that he's under a lot of stress, that, you know, there's a lot of political turmoil in his camp, that they have already prematurely thought this war is over, we have it won, and they're now infighting among themselves instead of finalising this against Caesar. But Caesar's only chance, he only has one chance to win this thing, and that is if he is offered a pitched battle. And he has no way to kind of communicate that, he's no way to stress that, he knows that Pompey doesn't even want this. But Caesar's only chance right now to get out of this thing is a pitched battle. If he doesn't get this, his troops will be starved out. They probably, in a month's time or whatever it was, turn on him or hand him over. You don't know, but you know, if you got a starving army, they'll probably do that to him. Loyalty only goes to a point. Even Caesar had once said himself that it's easier to find men willing to die than it is to find men who are willing to suffer for a long time. So this is what he's asking them to do, is to suffer a long time. But he needs a pitched battle. It is his only out. He's not even the favourite to win a pitched battle, but he needs one. And Pompey, who has checkmate in two, he's about to make the biggest possible blunder he could possibly make by offering Caesar the slim chance he has, but the only chance he has of winning this thing. So, Pompey finally gives in to the pressure to attack Caesar. Now, Titus Labienus was possibly the most adamant person in Pompey's camp to want an attack and end all this, because he is confidently predicting a victory. In reality, this is, as I've mentioned, it's not a good idea. Pompey has the most significant strategic advantage. He has more troops, better fortifications. He has reinforcements arriving daily, right? He is able to hamper Caesar's patrols. Caesar cannot forage. And one last thing, I forgot to mention this. The crops that year in Greece are late to ripen, so Caesar can't even rely on that. His only chance is the desperate last roll of the dice, pitched battle, and Pompey has just offered it to him.
And it really is the kind of thing where even if you had this pitched battle but delayed by a few weeks, he possibly even would have been so weak in that time. Like, it's just like the sooner the better for Caesar.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what he's getting.
Yeah, it's exactly. Now, Caesar's troops are also pumped because they lost the last battle, and he's kind of telling them, like, hey, if you want to make it up to me, win the next one, you know? So they are raring to go. Pompey, a day or two later, he shares his battle plan. Now, it's simple and it's direct to the point, and here is what he is quoted as of saying. Quote, "I have persuaded our cavalry, as soon as they get into close quarters, to attack Caesar's right wing from its unprotected flank, surround his line from the rear and throw it into confusion, and rout it before we have time to cast a single pilum at the enemy. They have answered me that they will do this. Thus, without danger to the legions, and almost without bloodshed, we shall bring this war to an end." End quote. Now, the cavalryman, or cavalry commander, who's reassuring him is almost certainly a quote from Labienus. So, effectively, for the next few days, Pompey is refusing battle. Caesar is desperate, but the battle is his only valid option. It is going to happen. On the 9th of August in 48 BC, we are going to have the famous Battle of Pharsalus. So, realistically, when we set this up, as we said, Pompey is going to give battle. He is the favourite to win. This is Caesar's only chance, but in typical fashion, for this battle, it's surrounded by omens and myths and, legend There are reports that there were bad animal sacrifices, there were fireballs in the sky. All of these are meant to be, probably later added to the story. Another example is the night before, which would be the 8th of August, Pompey is supposed to have had a dream about Venus, and that's the deity that Caesar is meant to have claimed ancestry to. It's important to really note, though, that Caesar is the only source for this battle. And even then, its events are oversimplified, and when Caesar describes this battle, he is likely exaggerating Pompey's numbers, and Caesar also treats this battle as if it is a tactics lesson in military theory. So we cannot be 100% sure that what he says is exactly accurate. Now, it's beautiful because we have a commander telling us what happened on the day. But literally we have probably one of the most biased sources you could possibly have. So, what does Caesar have? And I'm going to go through some of these. He has 22,000 men in 8 legions. Now, these legions are legendary. He has the 10th, he has the 7th, he has the famous 13th, the Mounted Legion. All these legions have nicknames as well. These are battle-hardened legions from Gaul. He has the 11th Legion, the 12th, he has the 7th Legion, the 8th, and the 9th. Now, a Sulla, who's the nephew of Sulla, will be a sub-commander in Caesar's army. He'll be in charge of the 10th Legion, and he'll be in charge of the 7th Legion. Domitus, another legate, he'll be in charge of the 11th and the 12th, and then Mark Antony himself will be in charge of the 9th Legion and in charge of the 8th Legion. Caesar will position himself at the back of the army beside 8 reserve cohorts. The plan that Pompey is about to do is quite obvious. Pompey now, similarly, if we look at some of his troops, he has the Syrian legions, and he also has another commander, Domitus, on his side, who's commanding legions 1 and 3. Those are his veteran legions. He does, though, have overwhelming cavalry advantage and an overwhelming number of troops in comparison to Caesar, according to Caesar. Pompey, likewise, is also stationed behind his army, and he's got some Greek auxiliaries with him, and some additional cavalry, and some archers and slingers. So it's quite the setup, and so Pompey is meant to thoroughly outnumber Caesar. Now, Caesar is only meant to have 1,000 cavalry, and Pompey is to have 7,000 cavalry. The sides both have additional light troops. They're peppered in among them. And the bulk of Pompey's cavalry are on the left flank as planned. Now, the right flank happens to be protected by terrain. In this case, it's a river. So both sides don't really have to worry about the right flank. Pompey, in this point, his left flank has this colossal force of cavalry ready to go. The plan is simple. The plan is going to be that they're going to just swing this cavalry in, blow Caesar's cavalry off the field, wheel around and completely destroy. Well, not even destroy, wheel around and just take care of the army. And then as people are surrendering or retreating, that'll be it. The war will be over. Maybe they'll capture Caesar. That's it. Other things are important to note. The commonly executed tactic of Roman infantry at this time is to charge and throw their pilum and then engage in close quarters. So the idea is it's once again taking advantage of that kinetic energy. It's run in, get your pilum, throw it, and as that hits the enemy line, you withdraw your sword and you find a front rank that has been literally struck with heavy javelins. And then as they're disrupted, you're going to get in there and use your nicely formed line to attack their disrupted one and just go from that point. So you get an initial advantage and go there, and the charge at the start adds some extra momentum to your pilum throw. That's the common tactic. That's the use of the kinetic energy. For this battle, though, Pompey orders that his infantry do not charge. He says, let the Caesarian infantry do. Let them charge. Let them exhaust themselves by having to charge twice the expected distance and thus be blown out before they have to reach Pompey's lines. The reason Pompey is doing this is he wants to give his cavalry the most amount of time with Caesar's cavalry before the battle, the rest of the battle happens. So he's like, the cavalry will do this quickly. I want to minimize damage by having Caesar's troops have to cover that extra distance so we kill even less Romans while my cavalry deals with his cavalry and we end this battle as quickly as possible. When Pompey's cavalry charge at the start of the battle, Caesar's cavalry steadily give way. Now this is where Caesar wins this. Caesar has 8 cohorts of hidden infantry spring up from hiding places behind his cavalry to attack Pompey's cavalry with javelins as spears, stabbing at the faces of the cavalry riders to try and maximise the panic. Now it works. Pompey's cavalry is completely routed after that engagement. So unprotected, Pompey's archers and slingers behind his cavalry are massacred by Caesar's oncoming cavalry. Caesar's right flank swings around and makes contact with Pompey's 1st and 3rd legions under the command of Domitus, and they are now going to roll up along Pompey's troops. Meanwhile, and this is the difference between veteran troops and new recruits, the veterans of Caesar's legions behave in this battle almost flawlessly. Seeing that the enemy doesn't charge while they're charging at them during the opening of the battle, Caesar's veteran legions signal a halt at the halfway point, wait, recover, and then charge again.
Just taking that initiative.
Yeah. But you see, this is where Caesar has the advantage. Obviously, like all credit where credit is due to the centurions and the legates and everything, this is where you see they could do that on a command, with so little notice. They were able to just do that immediately and instantly. It's fantastic.
It really is just like the perfect, and I mean it's probably, as you said, probably exaggerated a bit by Caesar's because he wants it to be a textbook example. But It is the textbook example of, on one side, you have an army, their backs against the wall, but willing to be innovative and change their tactics, spur of the moment and adaptable. And the other one that is so inflexible, doing things so perfectly textbook, and despite having overwhelming advantage, just being so afraid to take the slightest risk that they end up kind of losing everything as a result.
Oh, yeah. The veterans, when they have their secondary charge, get all of the advantage because they now have that kinetic energy charge and throw, and Pompey's legionnaires don't. They now just have to throw from a standing position, and effectively they lose that. Pompey's infantry initially hold, but as they're being rolled up along the right flank, they're just going to be massacred. Now, Pompey's not going to stay around for this. The moment the cavalry is routed, Pompey leaves the battlefield. Now, I'll come to that in a moment because that's pretty important. But Caesar focuses on killing the Greek and the Eastern troops in the army, sparing as many Italians as possible, and this battle is won. Now, there's going to be between 6,000 and 15,000 casualties and 24,000 people captured. Once again, these numbers could all be completely inflated. But this is a thorough victory for Caesar. So, Cathal, alright, now that this battle is over, what does the history machine think of Caesar and Pompey's performance?
So this is one where, again, it likes Caesar. But I will say, his win over expectation for this is 0.53. So, it has it as close to 50-50. You go by Caesar's stats, and it makes it seem like this was an unwinnable battle. Like, they were so outnumbered, and they had inferior cavalry, everything else. I think even the history machine at this point has kind of come to recognize, the numbers around this period of time in this part of the world with a grain of salt, because it's probably Caesar writing them up and exaggerating them.
Yes.
So it's only giving Caesar a slightly under 50 chance to win. It doesn't give him, it's not saying, oh, he was 90% going to lose this. It's he was 53-54% chance going to lose this.
Oof.
I think the other interesting stat from this is the casualties dealt by Caesar. It's 18% above expectation. So, that's high compared to the average general, but compared to a lot of Caesar's battles, that's actually not that high. So, again, you maybe see, he's happy enough wiping out a lot of the, auxiliary troops and a lot of the people from outside the imperial corps, but he's purposely not killing the Italians that might matter politically down the road.
Yeah, and he could be using these legions later. The 1st and 3rd legion will effectively now be Caesar.
Yeah, you're going to have a lot of them defect to him after this, so...
It's the case it's going to be.
They want to keep their loot.
Yeah. Impressive battle. Now, I know we've covered it before in Caesar's episode. We're just kind of going into it again, but we want to focus on Pompey's part of this and what's going to happen to Pompey and how he had planned this and how it engaged and what was meant to happen, but how it didn't happen. That, this was what was meant to happen on paper, but it didn't go to plan. So, right after this battle, or right during this battle, Pompey is meant to have retreated back to his camp, gone into his tent, and brooded, just, moping about. Eventually, he receives full news from the defeated army of the oncoming Caesarian advancement, and only then does Pompey seem to strip himself of his general's cloak and his insignia, get on a horse, and retreat. Now, I'm going to go into this because we can't fully be sure of Pompey's actions or the exact reasons for them. The first possibility: he may have had a mental breakdown the moment he witnesses the cavalry being routed, because he knows his entire plan is on the basis that he has superior cavalry. His cavalry are meant to defeat Caesar's cavalry and wheel around. For the longest time, he has not engaged Caesar in a pitched battle for most of this campaign, on the basis that he's going to be fighting these veteran legions, and he does not have enough veteran infantry himself. So the cavalry is his solution to this problem. Another possibility is his huffing and puffing and brooding might have been him acting up to his foolish decision to risk the overwhelming strategic advantage he had, and risking it all, and albeit he was the favourite, but risking it all on a pitched battle. Another possibility, because Pompey hasn't experienced this before, but panic might have also stripped him of any sane judgment, and this is why he's just left the battlefield, gone back to his tent, is moping around, and only then later does he come to his senses. One very interesting idea of why he did this, though, is that Pompey, upon seeing that the cavalry has failed and that they're routed, retreats immediately to spare his army from total annihilation. You might be going, what do you mean? Now, he knows that Caesar would spare the legions. Now, funnily enough, Pompey's absence would actually prevent an unnecessary continuation of the battle, because as long as he is in the thick of it, or worse, he is dead and his corpse is just thrown in there, there could be people dying to rescue it, and how many people have to die to rescue his corpse? Now, this possible action, this quick retreat that he has, might just be the military equivalent of resigning a game of chess early after a blunder, where he just goes, oh, sorry, I just lost my queen in like turn 3. I'm going to quickly resign, and we go to, that's it, we're done. So that is a possibility. Now, we're giving him the benefit of the doubt that it's a little bit of a stretch there, but the idea is he may have had a mental breakdown, he may have just been huffing and puffing, he may have been panicked, he may have been all of the above, but his retreat might have been him kind of jumping 2 or 3 steps ahead and going, there's no need for me to be here. There's no need for me to die on this battlefield, and there's no need for people to fight to try and save me. I know this battle is over. Pompey's defeat is more due to Caesar's tactical brilliance and the ability of his veterans than a mistake made by Pompey. Pompey's plan is simple and it's sound, and it would have worked against most other commanders, but Caesar is not most other commanders. It should be noted for this battle as well, Pompey didn't have his usual level of planning. He's getting old. And for the next 6 weeks after it, we can't be completely sure of his route or his plan, but he heads south and he heads east, and he's almost certainly looking for support from one of the many client kings in this region of the world who owe a lot of favours and money to him, so he can raise another army and fight Caesar. Pompey heads further south towards Egypt. He's picking up ships, he's picking up men, he's picking up his wife and son. So he's getting the old gang back together, and he's going to try and pick up as much resources as he can along the way. He starts raising as much money as he can, and he starts getting additional ships. Rhodes, though, declares against him, and hearing this, Pompey collects as much money as he can from Cyprus, and he heads straight to Egypt. Likely, though, when he's heading to Egypt, he's going to be throwing himself at the mercy of the boy king, Ptolemy the 13th. Now, Ptolemy the 13th and his family owe much of what they have to Pompey. Remember earlier, Pompey is responsible for Pompey the 12th regaining control of the throne, and Egypt would be the most likely choice to appeal to of all of his client kingdoms, and they also have the most amount of resources he could pull from, and they owe him the biggest favours. We'll see where this is going to go. Egypt is in a civil war at this time, and the boy king Ptolemy the 13th has 3 main senior advisors who are effectively ruling as regents. The first one is the eunuch Pothinus. The second is Theodosius, who's a tutor in rhetoric to the boy king. And the last person who's effectively running Egypt through the boy king is the commander of the Egyptian forces, Achilles. Now, upon reaching Egypt in his ships, Pompey sees a small boat come out to meet his flagship. Now, on board includes a Roman tribune who is from a garrison left in Egypt dating back from Ptolemy the 12th. And also on that boat is the commander of the Egyptian forces, Achilles, and one other additional person, a senior centurion, Septimius, who greeted Pompey as Imperator. Achilles, on this small raft, invites Pompey to come on aboard, and he also apologises for not thinking of bringing a trireme or a more appropriate ship for such a big occasion, but he claims the waters are just a bit too shallow. It wouldn't be the best thing to do.
This is giving similar vibes as right before a mob hit in a mafia movie.
Oh, it's only going to get closer. So, ignoring the many warnings of his companions who say, do not get on this raft, they're alarmed at really flimsy, so Pompey's group are effectively alarmed at these flimsy excuses, and they also notice the unexpected sight of the king's ship anchored close inshore. They go, why is he there? So Pompey, though, against all advice, he decides to go on board. Now, he embraces his wife, he takes 2 centurions, and he takes a slave by the name of Philippus with him. He climbs down his ship and onto this, flimsy raft, and his departing words were supposedly, quote, "Whoever goes to a tyrant's court becomes a slave, no matter how free before," end quote. Ooh. On the journey to the shore, no one talks. Really ominous. We're breaking the silence. Pompey is said to have recognised Septimus saying, "Hey," quote, "don't I know you, soldier?" end quote. And receiving no reply, to combat this eerie silence, Pompey decides he's going to study over the Greek speech he's prepared to give in front of the boy king Ptolemy the 13th. So as this silent journey continues towards the shore, when Pompey reaches the shore, he steps into the water and he is stabbed from behind by Septimus. Pompey pulls his toga over his head. Now, this is a respected cultural way for a Roman to die, and he is struck twice more by Achilles and one of the other soldiers. The blame for this murder is placed squarely on the young Ptolemy the 13th, but his tutor Theodosius would be the one who argued that this killing was the only safe course of action. Now, to accept or reject Pompey would bring the ire of Caesar or Pompey. Theodosius' famous line is that, quote, "dead men don't bite," end quote. The thought was that if they killed the enemy of Caesar, they'd gain his favour and they'd thus end any obligations or retributions they have to Pompey. So Pompey was killed on the 28th of September, one day before his birthday, and he would have been 59 years old, which conveniently was also the anniversary of his triumph over Mithridates VI in 61 BC. After being stabbed to death, Pompey's head is cut off, and along with his ring, it's presented later to a horrified Julius Caesar. Now, this is the story of Pompey, so we're going to continue with him. So Pompey's body, though it was left on shore, where his slave Philippus managed to pull together the body and enough driftwood and made a makeshift funeral pyre. This very loyal slave, Philippus, horrible to say slavery, but this person obviously had some care for Pompey, and he decided that with the limited resources and this body, he would cremate the body and deliver Pompey's ashes to his wife Cornelia. Cornelia would have these ashes later entombed back in Rome. And this is where our story ends, with one of the most famous, influential generals in Roman history. Now, we covered Pompey briefly in our episode on Julius Caesar, but we only focused on the very tail end of his career. And as Roman commanders go, there are very few who have such early command in their careers and few that have such command at such an old age. So, Cathal, we will talk about Pompey at the end, but for this episode, we will do a quick countdown of the commanders for this episode and the previous 2 episodes, lump them together, and then we'll talk about Pompey as well, regardless of where he features on this list. So, Cathal, from the last 3 episodes, we're going to do a top 6. So please, coming in at number 6.
At number 6, who maybe not the most significant, but I wanted to throw him in because he's one of the ones introduced in this episode, so we have an idea. We finally have someone doing worse than Pompey. Unfortunately, it's one of his sub-commanders. It's Labienus. 3 battles, 1 win, 1 loss, 1 draw. Wins over expectation of minus 0.23, so, 23% worse than the average general. Casualties suffered 20% more than expected. Casualties dealt roughly par.
Okay.
Yeah, Pompey shouldn't, given that he was the one really urging for what ended up being the decisive battle, Pompey should not have listened. He's a guy that seemed to big himself up a lot. He wanted to claim a lot of the credit for what Caesar had done, said it was more him than Caesar.
True.
Given how things went, maybe that wasn't the case. Maybe it really was Caesar who deserved the credit. He just didn't do very well in the battles he was involved in.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
Even though it was like, win 1, draw 1, lose 1, it's an average record, it's 50-50, but then you look into the context of the battles and who should have and who could have won, it's a big underperformance.
Okay. Now, he probably performed a lot better in Gaul, that's what he was giving out about, but I suppose maybe, it's probably one of these guys of like, he's great at being a sub-commander, but if you give him full command, he's just not quite up to it. Yeah.
And also probably just, in Gaul it was Roman soldiers versus Celts.
That's
and it
true,
was a bit
too.
More
That's true,
he was kind of on the side with the advantage going in. Once it became a bit more 50-50, he seemed to struggle.
The real litmus test is a civil war in this situation of same type troops, everything. Yeah. Fair. Okay, so coming in at number 5.
Number 5, we have Pompey, who this machine is just still not impressed by. His stat, we did update a couple of things, made a few corrections in his machine, but his stats have basically stayed the same as the previous episodes. Win over expectation of minus 4%.
Okay.
Most stats pretty much par. Casualties dealt 12% over expectation, which is not bad, but, not very, very average.
Yeah, very. We'll talk about him at the very end anyway, and all of his, everything that becomes, what is to mention. So coming in then, please, at number 4.
Number 4 from the previous episodes, we have Mithridates the Sixth.
Woohoo!
9 battles with 4 wins. Not a great record, but he was not expected to win almost all of those, so his wins over expectation is just under 10%. He's a good overperformer, pretty much always the underdog.
Yes,
but managed to get a few scrappy victories in amongst all the losses.
Fair play to him. He did live to an old age, albeit then eventually he, asked a guy to stab him. But that's where he is. I suppose. So coming in at number 3.
Number 3, we have Lucullus.
Ooh,
from
okay.
previous episodes as well. 7 battles, 7 wins, but again, usually had the advantage, win over expectation of just over 10%, and just never quite decisive enough to do that well politically. But the history machine thinks that he is maybe not one of the greats, but definitely good and, very competent. Someone you could rely on, but just not able to press the advantage strategically.
Now, I have a tiny bit that I forgot to mention in the last episode about Lucullus, but he had a quote about Pompey, and he claimed that Pompey was a vulture who effectively lived off the kills of other successful commanders and legates in his army and claimed all of the glory for himself. So it's a very, very damning, insult and a very damning claim. But he's kind of like, he's not all that, he's not great, he just happens to surround himself with competent people and is taking all the glory from whatever they do to win.
He is kind of a biased source, though.
Yes,
I think
yes.
anyone who would have had his life experience would come away with the same conclusion.
Yeah, I suppose that's probably the case. Okay, so coming in then at number 2.
Number 2, from early on in the series, we have Sulla. 7 battles, 7 wins. 32% win over expectation. Casualties dealt 48% higher than average. Absolutely.
Yeah, he's a butcher.
Yeah, that is the word. Massively destructive. He's, he was from early in our series, he didn't persist because, it was kind of early on in Pompey's career that he was relevant, but you see the echoes of him resonate the whole way through. He's always kind of the name invoked of this was a close call before with Sulla. Let's try not to have a Sulla again.
That's very fair. Now, actually, this is fascinating because in our last whole season, we kept going on and on about how Sulla was ranked number 1 and he was the best that we were able to see. But, and you'll find this interesting, as the History Machine gets gradual updates and we feed it more information, it kind of reassessed Sulla.
It softened on him a little.
A little.
Still one of the top tier all time, but he isn't the number 1 anymore.
And he's only kind of like dwindling out by a tiny margin. It's not a lot, but he's just gone a bit under. So it's kind of looked at Sulla and said, wow, he is all of that and everything. However, I think there's one person who's doing a little better. And what would be interesting about it is, as extra data was added, little things like that, and the History Machine itself was kind of gradually updated, it discovered and reassessed somebody for the number 1 position. So Cathal, coming in at number 1.
I promise I haven't been bribed. It's Caesar. 17 battles, 14.5 wins over expectation of 0.35.
Oh,
so
wow.
Just pipping out Sulla by like 3% here. Casualties dealt a good bit lower, still very high at 26% higher than the average, but like it very Sulla's is too much, especially these are both guys who kind of got embroiled in civil wars, and as we said, you don't want to kill all the people that then you have to lead when you get back home. So
unless you're Sulla.
Caesar probably being a bit more sensible in that regard, not to kill people from the home country as much.
Although Cathal, who ended up retiring as a dictator.
Touché.
Yeah, so yes, Caesar is now officially.
And it is funny, like we said, like the History Machine just really hates it. Totally does not care about Pompey and loves Caesar. And you look at, like, if you just looked at the battles and wins, they're almost exactly the same. It's nearly the same win percentage, and Julius Caesar only has 1 more battle in the database than Pompey, but they're just like miles apart in terms of how the History Machine rates them. This is possibly as well, like, I do think, like, take all the bias aside, like, Caesar was a better tactical commander by miles, but also he did get to write the accounts of what happened.
Yes.
Pretty much every time. His accounts are the ones that survive. So he got to fill in all these little biases and big up his wins a lot more.
Yes, definitely. Now, this is something just to mention. I think it's, as I said, the History Machine itself updated it. But Caesar is actually acknowledged, as much as we've only recorded what we have, he is meant to have the most number of battles of any Roman commander ever. He did a lot of fighting in Gaul, we'll put it that way, and then he has fighting in Spain, he has fighting in Africa.
It's the second most in our database. Only Hannibal has 23 battles in our database. He's the only one with more.
Yeah. But even historically, it's kind of acknowledged among the Romans. They go, no, Julius Caesar had the most amount of battles. And you go, he went from being a relative novice all the way to, and he is now, according to the History Machine, the top-ranked Roman commander. But for all that we've recorded, there's actually a lot we haven't recorded. Like Caesar he's had the most amount of battles of any Roman ever. And that all adds to his veterans, that all adds to his reputation, that adds to his flexibility, that adds to his tactics, that adds to his improvisation, it adds to everything. And Pompey, as good as he was at the whole logistical build-up, and we've seen him almost crush Caesar.
He probably should have won, but it was just kind of for political reasons as much as anything else, just forced to press the attack, and that gave Caesar a chance. And as we saw with the History Machine, like, Pompey still should have won that battle, but you look at, and obviously the History Machine's interpretation isn't perfect, but it was like, well, he's favourite, but not by that
not
much.
Not by a lot, yes,
like,
yes.
This isn't an unwinnable battle for Caesar. He's the underdog, but it's not like...
Yeah.
It's not like 90% to 10%. This is more like 55-60% versus, 40-45%. It was closer than I think they had realised.
Yes, yeah. So, I suppose this isn't the episode about Caesar, really. This is the final wrap-up on Pompey, and we're going to talk about him for a little bit, just to give him his final evaluation, his final follow-up, all we want to say about him. When we made this episode, this was, and thank you all for voting, whoever did vote, it was a democratic vote for who would we do as an extra episode, and it was decided we should probably do one on Pompey Magnus, Pompey the Great. And I'm delighted we did. It really opened up my eyes to a lot more of it when you go into him a little bit deeper and we actually cover his whole career, because it is his whole career. He starts as a teenager and he's almost 60. we're looking at 40 plus years.
You voted, and Niall had to write 21,091 words in bullet points, so this is abbreviated. You could have written a full book from these notes.
Yes, I could have.
This is a novella length number of notes. This is why it's 3 episodes.
Yes,
This is why there was I know we usually have long gaps between series, but this is why there was a very long gap between series here.
And this is why you got 3 episodes in 3 weeks. Because I was like, all right, I'm firing all these out now.
Yeah, just get it done at this point.
Yeah. I know we had a bonus episode in between it and everything, but this one took. I'm so glad we did it. I am so glad we did it, but it took a lot out of me to put it all together. But
if anyone's commenting, just thank Nah, because seriously, 21. I just periodically update the history machine and make tweaks to the code. You wrote 21,000 words for just these 3 episodes
for one guy.
Yeah.
There are probably presidential novels shorter. Okay, so let's have our final assessment. We have looked at the figures of Pompey and they have been wanting, but let's look at him as a person and what we know about him or what we have been told about him. So, let's go to it. So to begin with him, and to get really started, as Roman commanders go, right, there have been very few who have had such early command in their careers, and very few who have had command at such an old age. He had 3 triumphs. Now this is an unheard accomplishment at that time. In later Roman history, you're going to have, literally a Roman emperor will go to the beach and come back and have a triumph. They give him away for nothing. It becomes trivial. Sulla was right to inflate them, but they become pointless. But he has 3 triumphs. At the time it's unbelievable to think of it. So that's the first thing to say about him. He got that. Say what you want. He got to have 3 triumphs when they were almost impossible to get. Pompey would conquer regions in 3 different continents and the seas of Europe. Now Pompey, above all, he creates the empire and the client kingdoms that Augustus and his would-be eventual successors will inherit and consolidate. There is a reasonable possibility that the Republic could have fallen apart from internal struggles after the death of Sulla, but Pompey is the person who keeps the Republic going. And even though he will eventually be instrumental to the rise of Julius Caesar and its collapse, he keeps it going for one more lifetime. As for his military genius, Pompey's going to make a lot of mistakes against Sertorius in 82 BC. He will make mistakes against Caesar. He did have excellent energy and planning ability. Now that dulled at the very end of his life, but he did have phenomenal energy and his planning seemed to be second to none. He is the cold, calculating, bean counter type of commander rather than the flexible, in the heat of battle commander.
My kind of guy.
But he should have such advantage on the day that, as skilled as you might be at commanding troops, he probably still has your number. His true genius is in planning and logistics and attention to detail. He probably would have loved spreadsheets. We can say that he's tactically deficient, but he makes up for all of those tactical deficiencies with every event up to the battle and the day. His primary strategy is a war of attrition, and for these they all went very well when planned and executed fully, and they became very successful when they went to plan. Pompey could be lightning quick once all the ducks were in a row. Think of the pirate campaign. 6 weeks, they had the Mediterranean locked down. It's incredible when they can just execute these things and there's no problems. Probably his biggest blunder was by offering his breathing space to Caesar many times, and Caesar would use those to capitalise on them multiple times, whether it's getting away, whether it's being able to get troops across the sea, whether it's being able to, cross the Rubicon. He gave Caesar time, he gave Caesar the chance, and Caesar took it on multiple occasions. Pompey himself is not the most inspiring commander on the battlefield. Now, we have some records that he himself is a very capable infantry and cavalry fighter. Even in his old age, he's, throwing javelins and pilums at further distances than, men aged 20. He's doing very well. He did kill an enemy single-handedly. We've had cases where, he's fought really well on cavalry. So no one questions his bravery. No one questions his fighting ability. One thing I forgot to mention, I probably should have, he was notoriously squeamish, which is strange. He didn't like the animal sacrifices or the entrails, and he possibly had a fear of blood. Which, you go for a military commander. But he overcomes all of that, in the sense of, like, on the day he fights the way he's meant to fight and he behaves the way he's meant to behave. And in one-on-one and hand-to-hand combat, he seems to be quite an effective and good guy. But it's been shown up a few times where they're like, and then, there's a sacrifice and Pompey's like, ew. He's like, it's an interesting thing that he had, that he wasn't that. He was very, very superstitious as well, to a fault. He'd believe his own hype. He might believe he had the near-death experience, and when he survived it because people were praying for his health, he went, maybe I am favoured. Maybe I am covered in a divine cloak of protection, Now, he is similar in his military character to the Emperor Tiberius. They both are excellent planners. They're both determined to keep their troops alive and safe. They both have excellent logistics. He's that kind of a guy. Now, he rewarded his troops handsomely, and undoubtedly, he worked to champion causes post-campaigns, especially for his officers. And in the world of Roman politics, he did advance a lot of other people's careers. And that's really strange, because normally it's a zero-sum game for Romans, and they go, if I don't get to be consul, why would I bother make somebody else consul? But he seemed to be the guy that if you worked for Pompey, he probably would prop you up. Even if, you didn't deserve to be propped up, like when Sulla was giving out about Catulus, and when even the perfect example, he propped up Julius Caesar. It's like, no.
Yeah.
You don't give that man any power. Even Sulla was saying we should kill this guy. You probably should have listened to him.
But he's my young father-in-law. I have to.
Yeah. I have to call him dad. So yeah, he's accused of being selfish and he's accused of being greedy. But then you see him do that every now and then. You go, actually, maybe he's doing it for favours, or maybe he's just a nice guy. It's hard to tell. As a politician, he was very limited in his ability. Now, whether this was due to complete incompetence or the jealousy of his rivals or both, he was ineffective at the most simple of tasks. His only success in politics was raising others. Pompey was not solely part of the Optimates or the Populares factions. At a time, he kind of championed the Equite class because he originated from them, and like his father Strabo before him, he didn't slip into the typical mould of a Roman political figure. He didn't form a political faction. He didn't go through the normal process as well, and our assessment of that was detrimental to him. It might have made him maybe a better Roman commander in the long run, but not having to use a cheat sheet to run the day-to-day operations is pretty poor. He should have gone through the regular chains, but he was able to take advantage, during the Sulla time to not have to do that. As a strategist in politics, he was able to plan long term, but he's unable to overcome any swift tactical changes that could happen, and those happen to dominate the Roman Senate all the time. He struggled with debates, he struggled with changes, he really struggled with vetoes, and this would often result in him eventually taking himself out of politics, going into a long, prolonged period of retirement, and possibly planning a return or doing things behind the scenes, and then eventually, when chaos ensued, he'd find himself put in command again. There have been several times where Pompey will go to retirement and there will be political chaos, someone will approach him and go, you need to be in charge, and he says yes. But you shouldn't have to do that. That shouldn't be the case. He should be able to participate in politics. His biggest political failure was the formation of the Triumvirate. He shouldn't have to have done that. He should have been able to just been the main guy. And if he did it, he could have just done a Sulla and become a dictator. He was offered to be dictator, albeit later. But the Triumvirate is going to be the failing of the Roman Republic, and it's going to be the death of Pompey. In order to gain temporary political stability, he formed the Triumvirate, and he springboarded the biggest political rival you could possibly imagine, and more importantly, an even bigger military rival, Julius Caesar. Ultimately, the Triumvirate is going to be a net negative and devastating for Pompey. It should never have been formed. He should never have agreed to it. He should have been able to do this and get the simple 2 jobs he wanted to do, his veterans some land and ratifying his conquest in the East done, without the help of effectively a military thug. He should have been able to do that. If he has a serious fault, Pompey. It is that he loved titles and rewards. He is almost childish by some standards for chasing the Alexander the Great-like glory, although if I found myself in his position, I'd probably be doing the exact same thing. He was incredibly vain. That is just him. I mentioned his squeamishness, and we did touch on it, but he was terrified of the possibility of being assassinated, or the threat of violence being used against him, which is really unusual for a battle-hardened veteran such as himself. But with all that in mind, his bravery and merit on the battlefield is never really questioned, but people will mention to Pompey, like, hey, somebody might be planning to assassinate you, and he will get out of there. You know, that is how you get his attention, or that is how you get him to do something really quickly. If you threaten physical violence against him, if a son does come at him with a cudgel, he will react. He shares many qualities with Augustus, who, like him, didn't openly oppose the petitions, and he understood that to do so, it would doom him to failure. Although he was very ambitious for his awards, he never wanted uncontested power. Now, on several occasions, he was offered the dictatorship, and each time he rejects it. And remember, he decided to be sole consul, and it was the idea of, like, I don't want to be the dictator. That word has bad connotations. I'll just happen to be the only consul, and it's nonsense. It's wordplay. It's a technicality. Pompey was content to be the biggest fish in the pond, as opposed to being the only fish in the pond. He didn't mind if other people had power or had prestige or army or even other triumphs, as long as he got to be the biggest guy. And no one's really going to let that happen. There are often comparisons made with Augustus and Pompey, and the two probably have more in common than Caesar and Augustus. Now, they did have some serious differences though. 18 plus years of civil war had left the Senate with no choice but to have a strong permanent princeps, and that left Augustus in charge. Before that, Pompey could still be sidelined, and the Senate could still somewhat function. Not, albeit, they were a little bit messy, but they could somewhat function. Augustus would add more powers than Pompey, and he would add them permanently. He would never give them up. He would be given more and given more titles, and he would do that. He would never actually surrender power. Pompey would. Augustus would also aim for like a rule of succession. His kids and adopted kids were going to be in charge. Pompey showed little interest in ever setting up anything for his children or for succession. It's kind of like, you're on your own, kids. Do your own thing. I'll show you how to fight in a campaign, but if you want to become elected, that's your problem. So Pompey seemed to take care of Pompey, and he didn't really seem to, do anything for his own kids, unlike Augustus. Now, it should be noted though, Augustus would have, on his funeral day, Pompey's image and not Julius Caesar's image carried at the funeral procession. It is Pompey's career, not Julius Caesar's, that carried the mantle of power from Sulla all the way to Augustus. He is the bridge from that civil war all the way to Augustus. And he straddles those two worlds. And he is a commander in those two worlds. And he is instrumental to those two generations. And it is ultimately Pompey that will enable Augustus a lot more than Caesar does. Caesar ends up winning that civil war, tries to become dictator for life, ends up being killed, Augustus takes over, another small civil war, and Augustus is in charge. That's it. But none of this would have been possible if it were not for Pompey. If you remove him from the equation, you might have gotten a Caesar, but you definitely get a Caesar with Pompey. For his character, that's very debatable. He's contradictory at times. He's proud and vain, he's honest, or at least he claims to be honest, or appears to be. And there's a lot of evidence that he was calculating behind the scenes with secret agendas. And if you're like, now, Niall, maybe you're going a little bit too far with this, you're probably being a little bit too skeptical, or... He made a secret agreement with two other Romans so they could all run the place. So, and we know about that triumvirate agreement. And, he met with Caesar secretly a few times. And he had a lot of client kings, so he is such a complex three-dimensional character. You could probably say almost anything about Pompey and be accurate. You could probably claim that he was a vulture and stealing military victories and be right, and you could quote Lucullus and say, look, he said that, there's a source. You could probably also say from another source that he was brilliant and that he was charismatic and that he was a fantastic developer and planner and a great commander. And you can probably look at him as a simple, honest, humble Roman commander and have all the evidence to suggest that. And you could probably also say that he was a calculating, cold, secret, atypical Roman commander or atypical Roman politician who tried to grab as much rewards for himself as possible. And you'd have all the evidence to suggest that. So you can, it's such a long time ago we can never quite be sure, but you can paint so many different pictures of this guy and you can support almost all of it with evidence. Even with all that said, he's a lot less ruthless than his peers. He was forged in the time of the Sullan purges and he didn't use those to advance his own position or wealth. Even though it said he loved money like his father Strabo, that doesn't quite come across either. He never did purge his enemies. He never did pull a Sulla on it, even though later he has the whole, well, Sulla could do it, why couldn't I? That was at the very tail end of his career. Only then did he kind of go, this would be a simpler solution for the problems I'm encountering. He tended towards superstition. His occasional moodiness had all the signs of a highly complex three-dimensional human being. You could probably say anything about him and demonstrate an example, and you could lean that way. But all in all, he was a titan in the Roman world. He was a near emperor of the East and one of the few Romans ever, and the only recognisable one, to be given the title of the Great. Oh, have you anything else you want to add to that, Cathal?
I mean, I think I'd be kind of stepping on your points a bit, but just to iterate again, like he comes across in an era, like you're so used to seeing big figures in this era like Sulla and Caesar and Augustus, and they're so larger than life, and they've been kind of flattened by history into these one-dimensional characters on a pedestal, kind of like above other humans. Pompey is so full of the contradictions and hypocrisies that make him human.
Yes.
He is power-hungry and greedy, but also refuses power when it's offered to him, and at times decides, I'm just going to retire and join my book club and build a theatre with my wealth and make sure that my guys got paid and look after the veterans. He's so charming that he gets brought to court, and at the end the judge says, please marry my daughter, and then he can't get any political things through, and he needs a cheat sheet to get through daily political life. He can't get anyone on side, he can't get his bills through.
Yeah.
And then you say, oh, well, he's politically naive, even if it's charismatic day to day, but you're like, no, he set up a secret agreement that would go on to basically run the empire, unofficially. He's a walking contradiction, and I think I say this after every series, but this one, I really feel this time, I need my Pompey mini-series.
Yes.
You look at what are the stories we talk about with, ancient Rome, what are the, events that happen that people go on and on about, and he spans half of them,
Yes, very true.
He's there for so many of them. His life links up with so many others. He goes from friends to enemies and back and forth with people like Caesar and Sulla, and
I have to agree with you. I know there is a HBO Rome series, but that only covers the tail end of his life. You're like,
I need one going start to end on Pompey, because you have the personal drama, you have the large scale political drama. It has everything.
It does,
and you have the mob hit ending. He thinks he's going to get made at the Egyptian court, and then bam, right in the back of the head.
They Joe Pesci'd him.
Yeah.
Oh no, bang.
Well, that's that.
Oh, that is that. What I've got to say, as I said, that's the most amount of time we spent on a single person. It's the most amount of episodes we've given to anybody. We'll probably have some other episodes coming out after this, but to be decided, or to be, there's a couple we have possibly planned. But, I'm going to say we've had 3 episodes in 3 weeks. There will not be a 4th episode in the 4th week.
We will return to our usual, totally regular scheduling.
But we'll try and be a little bit more better. But still,
it'll take a while for you to write another 21,000 words.
It will. Maybe I'll do something a little simpler.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have another vote. But all in all said, as I said, I've really enjoyed researching this. I've really enjoyed talking about it. This complex character has mulled over in my head for a long time and become more and more interesting, and I cannot figure him out. And just when I think I have, he gets a little bit crazier or a little bit harder to figure out. He's like a modern day, political figure. He's that complex. It's wonderful because you have the same way modern day political figures. Oh, I love that guy. I hate that guy. It all depends on your opinion. It all depends on what you think about him. It all depends on your values. Pompey the Great. He definitely we said in the Caesar episode he's not the Great, but I have to say for this one, we'll ignore what the History Machine thinks about him. because it was possibly bribed by Caesar.
The history machine does not reflect my opinions. I think he was interesting, even if the history machine disagrees.
I think it was very, very interesting as well. I will agree with the history machine that his tactical ability was wanting. His tactical ability was lacking, but his logistics and everything else around it, and his political career was a bit lacking, but everything else was phenomenal. You don't get somebody like this every day, and it's why he's remembered. So that's it for Pompey the Great. So I have been Niall.
And I've been Cathal.
And we'll see you again. Thank you.